Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Infrastructure Planning and Environment Committee meeting. Before the meeting starts, we have a public forum for the 13th of April 2026. To start the public forum, I must inform you that this public forum and meeting is being live streamed and recorded under Council's Code of Meeting Practice. By attending, you consent to your image and voice being recorded and published on Albury City's website. Members of the public are also reminded to refrain from making defamatory remarks or disclosing personal information. Albury City is not responsible for comments made by individuals. Recording live streams are protected by copyright owned by Albury City. No part may be copied, recorded, reproduced, or transmitted without prior written consent of the CEO. PF2, conflict of interest declared and received by the Chair. Mr. McGrath.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I do have one. It's from Councillor Callaghan, declaring a non-pecuniary less than significant conflict due to a family member has submitted feedback through the report, and it's in respect of item number IP&E 10.2, which is the draft heritage strategy. Councillor Callaghan has indicated that she intends to stay in the room and participate in discussion and voting.
Thank you. So in terms of the public forum and the meeting, that would be considered?
Correct.
Thank you. Okay. We start PF3. The speakers tonight, PF 3.1 is Natalie Dando, who's on our screen from the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, IPE 10.2 Draft Heritage Strategy Review, Public Exhibition Submission, speaking against the recommendation. Welcome, Natalie Dando. You're online if you wish to start. You have 5 minutes and then there'll be questions at the end.
Excellent. Thank you for allowing me to present. My name is Natalie Dando and I work in the assets team of the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, or MDBA. The MDBA have a good relationship with Council's infrastructure team on matters relating to River Murray and Hume Dam. And the purpose of my presentation is to outline concerns regarding the proposed local heritage listing of Hume Dam, to draw the Council's attention to the submissions made by the MDBA and Water New South Wales to the proposed listing, and to explain why the listing is premature and insufficiently developed. By way of background, Hume Dam is a River Murray operational asset. The MDBA oversee the operation and management of this asset on behalf of the Australian Government and the New South Wales, Victorian and South Australian state governments. Water New South Wales is responsible for the day-to-day operation, maintenance and management of works, and Goulburn Water manage the water and foreshore located in Victoria. Hume Dam, as you know, is strategically important and a critical piece of water infrastructure in the Murray-Darling Basin. The dam plays a critical role in water and releasing it to regulate the flow of the River Murray. As well as irrigation, the dam supplies stock and household needs for towns and landholders along the Murray River across 3 states, and is also used for flood mitigation and hydroelectricity. While I'm sure early consultation occurred with many parts of the Heritage Review, the MDBA and Water New South Wales were not advised or consulted in 2022 when the review commenced. As agencies responsible for operation and safety, we were not provided sufficient time to consider the listing, and this undermines the quality of the recommendation. Unlike static buildings, Hume Dam is a critical operational asset. Constructed in 1936, it is also ageing, with moving parts and ongoing safety, monitoring and maintenance requirements. Hume Dam is a declared dam under the Dam Safety Act and must be managed in accordance with this Act, as well as the dam safety regulations. A local heritage listing would limit Water New South Wales's ability to comply with the Dam Safety Act and dam safety regulation, or at the least unduly complicate their legal responsibilities under the Dam Safety Act and regulation. In particular, local heritage listing may be incompatible with and or confound Dam Safety New South Wales's powers regarding directions to ensure the safety of declared dams, stop work directions and emergency orders. The listing would also place additional constraints and assessment procedures on Water New South Wales, affecting how it manages and maintains this key infrastructure to maintain functionality and address potential safety risks that may arise as the dam ages. We need to ensure that the ongoing operation, maintenance and emergency response of this critical water infrastructure asset is not compromised. The historical significance of Hume Dam is not disputed. The information in the Albury Heritage Review from 2022 is, however, lacking in its accuracy, depth of investigation and supporting detail. The report incorrectly states Hume Dam is listed on the Victorian Heritage Register. The statement of significance relies on an Institute of Engineers extract from 2002, which was prepared for an engineering landmark recognition and was not intended to support local heritage listing. The recommendation also doesn't clearly define which elements of the dam are significant or why those elements require protection. As a result, it is unclear what Council seeks to protect, as the Heritage Review lacks precision and intent. An example of how this proposed listing is insufficiently developed is in the heritage area. The area proposed covers 67 hectares, but only about a quarter of the dam wall and only some of the gates. It covers the upstream foreshore area and many areas of vacant land around the site. While amendments to the curtilage is suggested, but not captured in your meeting paper, there is still no clarity on why it is or is not of heritage interest. For your information, as this wasn't picked up in the review, Hume Dam is recognised under Water New South Wales Section 170 Heritage Conservation Register under the New South Wales Heritage Act. The inclusion of the dam on this register provides formal notice requirements to the New South Wales Heritage Council, providing oversight and consideration of the heritage significance of the site. Local heritage listing is unlikely to materially provide increased levels of protection above the existing Section 170 requirements. In closing, I'd like you to note that only objections were received to the proposed listing. The proposed listing lacked appropriate consultation, technical detail, and clear heritage intent. For these reasons, the proposed heritage listing of Hume Dam locally is premature. As stated in the MDBA submission, progressing a local heritage listing of Hume Dam requires careful consideration to ensure that the function and operation of this critical asset is not unnecessarily burdened by additional administration, that Water New South Wales, Goulburn Water, MDBA and representatives of the contracting governments are consulted, there is consistency of approach for heritage management at Hume within both states, and that the ongoing operation and maintenance of this critical water infrastructure asset is understood so that the day-to-day operations, routine and planned maintenance and emergency response is not compromised. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dando. Questions, councillors? Any questions? Councillor Hudson.
Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Dando. You've raised some pretty significant concerns and alleged a number of things. I was just hoping you could extrapolate on or elaborate on how the heritage listing would impact Water New South Wales' ability to manage the dam safely.
So it's not clear in the recommendation what's actually proposed to be protected and how it would be protected. So as council would appreciate, with a number of existing infrastructure in council's portfolio, when you've got a structure that's got moving parts and is used daily, it's got mechanical elements, electrical elements, concrete elements, it needs repairs, it needs maintenance. And if all these things are going to start triggering heritage checks and approvals and heritage reports, that'll create significant time and cost delays to any activities at the dam.
Thank you. A follow-up question.
Yes.
Are there any other significant dams in the state that you're aware of which have similar heritage listings?
Water New South Wales could talk to what they have listed in the state of New South Wales, but along the River Murray, this is the first, is my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. And I acknowledge that this is not as we would always do, but I'm just wondering if our staff could provide an answer to a question, and I'll propose the question first. We would normally talk about it in the report later, but or we would ask questions of the staff in the report later. However,
we hold that on till the report is reviewed in the meeting, or?
It's specifically about the weir, the Hume Dam, as opposed to the whole of the report, which is why I was hoping, with your indulgence, might ask it. So if I could ask that question and then we could get a determination.
Sure.
So my question is a follow-up to the questions just asked now, to the most relevant member of staff. What is the intended outcome of a local listing to the point that it was raised by our speaker that it would not enable them to undertake their normal upkeep of the dam. Was it the intention, or what would a local listing have in effect, as far as our staff are concerned, on the dam and the functionality of it on an ongoing basis, as opposed to it being listed as a cultural item?
Mr. Christie?
Thanks for the question, and for you, Mayor Mack. So the intent is not unusual for items, as indicated before, it is on other listings. So it's not unusual for items. We've got a number of items which are state listed as well as local listed. Burrinjuck Dam is an example of a major dam in the Murray-Darling Basin Authority that's also listed on the Yass Valley Local Environmental Plan. And the idea of it is it recognises the significance that the Hume Dam has played in Albury and Albury's development over time. When we do our Heritage Strategy Review, we look at a variety of themes, and that's broken up in the Heritage Strategy Review into themes. Some of those themes are around the construction of the Hume Dam and that impact that had on Albury's development. Also things such as, later on we talk about Albury as a Whitlam Government Growth Centre, and then you look at items that represents that as a totally separate item. We look at how those items are representative of the themes, because those themes are what Albury, and that unique to Albury, consider as some of those key elements or key areas that have led to Albury's development. Hume Dam is a classic example of one of those themes. Just for some clarity, what was out on exhibition, obviously for councillors tonight, is the Heritage Strategy Review, which is the attachment 1 document. Included with that also were some recommendations from the Community Heritage Working Group, which came through council in its July-August council meeting cycle, which identified a number of items to add to our heritage register, as well as potentially take off our heritage register, and also do some alterations to our heritage register. This Heritage Strategy Review does not endorse those. It does not create those changes, does not list items in our local environmental plan, nor take items off our local environmental plan. It was there for information about what were some of the recommendations from our community when asked for community recommendations, which were in 2022. Some were received as late as 2024. And so I was seeking some input, such as what's been raised by Ms. Dando there. They would be ones that would be used to improve the heritage listing if it was to continue. So you can be clear around information that might be provided there, outcomes and the like. But the heritage listing may not necessarily talk about precise outcomes. It can talk about thematic outcomes as well. So I want us to talk about precise items that might need to be looked at and how they get maintained on site, all the way through to just consider how you manage the Hume Dam in context to its importance to Albury. So it can be a broad range of components, but just stressing that the Heritage Review was what was on exhibition. The other documents were talking around what might be some further changes that would occur, seeking community input, and they were going to be the subject of a separate report because they require a planning proposal to council to exhibit those changes and make formal changes to our LEP.
Okay. Careful what you ask for. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Callaghan.
Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Dando. You raised an important point, and I'd be curious for you to elaborate a little bit further if you would indulge. You mentioned time and cost delays to the day-to-day operations of your organisation. Can you elaborate? It was raised actually a few times throughout some feedback we've received. How does it specifically affect you guys in relation to time and cost delays?
So the challenge, I guess, because the devil's in the detail, we don't have the detail, but for example, if the painting of the gates on Hume Dam were to trigger heritage approval, there's about 27 gates and they're on a rolling plan. We can only remove one gate at a time, so that when we put a replacement gate in, if each one of those needs an approval, that then adds to the costings, the timing, and the sequencing of when we do those things. And those things are very time critical in terms of water levels, machinery, and other things that might be happening on site. So depending on the works, depending on what is triggering an approval, and then the process of approval and what's required to support that, it's an unknown factor. But there are examples. You mentioned the Burrinjuck Dam, where that has caused significant delays to Water New South Wales, is my understanding, due to heritage approvals that they've needed to obtain. That's added significant timeframes onto what is already a sort of fairly significant project. So does that help?
It does. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Natalie, for your presentation, and it will be considered during the meeting this evening.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Our pleasure. PF 3.2, Noel Jackling, IPE 10.2, Draft Heritage Strategy Review, Public Exhibition Submission, speaking against the recommendation. You there, Mr. Jackling? No?
Yeah, he was just in the waiting room. Most of the meeting there.
Noel Jackling.
Yes, I'm
Welcome
here.
to Albury City. We're just starting your presentation. If you could start that, we're looking at a black and white pictorial of the looks like the post office.
Yes, as I believe it was in 1879.
Yep.
So,
Okay, away you go.
Thank you, Mayor Mac. Look, I speak in relation to the Albury Post Office, which is referred to in items 10.2.4 and 10.2.29, and also in 10.2.5 of the agenda. The start point is that the Albury Post Office was the communications hub for the IVA event in Albury on the night of 23rd, 24th October 1934, when, thanks to the people of Albury, the IVA made a safe landing on the Albury Racecourse. It happened because Arthur Newnham was in the ABC studio of the Albury Post Office on the first floor, and broadcaster called for people to go out to the racecourse to use their headlights to illuminate a landing strip for the plane. But none of the post office heritage listings mention the IVA event, and therefore do not mention the post office's sociological or historical significance in connection with that event. I'm seeking to have those omissions redressed. So the difficulty I have is that by passing the provisions as they currently stand in the Heritage Review 2025 to 2035, that will mean no support for renomination or revision of the local environment plan listing. The change will only, to use the words of the report, be included in any updated listing. There's no support for renomination of the Commonwealth listing. All that will happen is the provision of information that actually I've already provided, and apart from some information from Albury City, only available on upon a Freedom of Information application. While there is support for renomination of the state heritage listing, that may not happen for up to 10 years, which is when the next Albury City Heritage Review is due to start. Councillors, I have emailed you all over my concerns with the recommendations, and I will not go over that territory now. That would be wasting your time. So all I really wish to do is to encourage you to read my email, if you haven't already done so, and especially to read the endorsements that come from the Dutch Embassy, from the Ambassador, from renowned aviator Richard de Crepigny, and from Nicole Thomas, who is a local heritage and museum person. And what I've added into that is a suggested motion to overcome my concerns, which you may be able to put forward at the meeting on next Monday night. So that's really all I wish to say, because it's all in my letter. And just to say now that You're welcome to ask me questions.
Thanks, Mr. Jacklin. The shortest time we've ever spent talking. Okay, any questions, councillors? I think they're happy to look at the email. I have read the email, Noel, and it is quite comprehensive, and certainly we will discuss it during tonight's meeting, but more importantly, thanks for your input today, because I know you're very passionate about all things Albury and all things to do with the IVA and certainly our history. So thank you again, and it's a wonderful black and white of the very grand post office, which was extended upon at some point. Do you know what date that was, Mr. Jacklin?
Not precisely, but it was the late 1930s.
Very grand, very grand. Thank you very much, and thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, PF 3.3, we have Jacinda O'Brien from CSU. IPE 10.2, Draft Heritage Strategy Review, Public Exhibition Submission, speaking against the recommendation. Thank you, Ms. O'Brien.
Good evening, all councillors and committee members, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Jacinta O'Brien. I am the Manager of Campus and Space Planning at Charles Sturt University, and I'm speaking on behalf of the university. Charles Sturt strongly supports the preservation of heritage where it is justified, reflects the actual condition of the place, and aligns with established criteria. We recognise the importance of heritage to Albury's identity, and we support the balanced approach outlined in Council's heritage strategy, one that protects genuine heritage while enabling contemporary use and community benefit. The university submission was prepared with specialist heritage advice and appears in attachment 9. Given the volume of material that you have before you, and given there has been no visit to campus by a council officer or council appointed heritage specialist, we want to ensure our position is understood. We'll do this through providing a short summary, which will give the committee an opportunity to get more context through recent visual evidence. Next slide, please. Am I not? Are you? Thank you. Building 678, former State Forestry building. Charles Sturt does not support the proposed listing of Building 678. Our objection is based on current condition, building fabric integrity, and loss of heritage value, not on alterations over time, as the summary suggests. These images illustrate the key issues. External elements have deteriorated significantly, and some original features no longer function or present as intended. The internal layout and building fabric no longer meet contemporary accessibility, safety, or sustainability requirements. The building sits partly on unformed ground and exposed rock, causing structural movement and stormwater ingress. It has been vacant for a number of years and has been subject to vandalism and unauthorised access. Next slide, please. Because of this, the architectural qualities described in the nomination, such as transitional spaces, natural light design elements, and the intended organic integration with the landscape, have been materially compromised by deterioration, environmental impacts, and long-term vacancy. We see also within attachment 9, the original architect's submission of support for listing Building 678 states the building is in its original condition and retains the original layout and features, which is not the case. This building does not meet criterion C in its current state, and listing it would be based on a design that no longer exists. For these reasons, we respectfully request that the committee not endorse the listing of Building 678. Next slide, please. Building 673, Gordon Bevan Building. Charles Sturt supports listing of the front eastern facade only, which is the element of genuine heritage value. The remainder of the building has been progressively adapted to support teaching, research, and tenancy operations. The internal layout, services, and accessibility features no longer reflect the original design intent. Council has deferred the Kirtley decision to the planning proposal stage. Our request is that the committee note CSU's position and amend the recommendation that only the front facade meets the heritage criteria, so this is not lost in the next stage. Next slide, please. Item I330, rammed earth buildings. Charles Sturt supports the continued listing of the rammed earth buildings. These buildings are genuinely significant and we have invested in their care for many years. However, the current curtilage spans approximately 20 hectares, capturing roads, infrastructure and unrelated buildings. This boundary does not reflect the actual heritage elements, which are the rammed earth walls of a defined group of buildings, and appears to have been applied as a broad circle rather than a considered heritage mapping exercise. Council's report suggests that any correction should occur in the planning proposal stage and that CSU should prepare a robust heritage justification. We respectfully note that curtilage was not created by the university and that its scale and shape are inconsistent with standard heritage practice. Our position is that the curtilage should be corrected as part of this review in line with the actual heritage fabric, rather than shifting the burden of justification onto the university. We ask that committee recognise that the current curtilage is disproportionate and that it should be reviewed and corrected as part of the council's heritage mapping process. In closing, we respectfully request that the committee do not endorse the listing of building 678 as it does not meet the heritage criteria. Acknowledge CSU's position that only the front facade of building 673 should be listed and ensure this is amended to be what is considered in the planning proposal. And support a review and correction of the 20 hectare curtilage for item I330, noting this boundary was created by council and does not reflect the actual heritage fabric. Thank you all for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much. Question from Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the speaker. Thank you for your presentation. Great to have such good feedback on the items included. My question is about building 678, the forestry building. I suspect that the building was built with a finite lifespan for what would have been the duration of the development corporation. Might that be correct?
Was originally built for the Forestry Commission, and it was commissioned to be built specifically for them. It features a lot of timber, which was a prominent requirement of the design brief at the time. And a lot of timber, as I'm sure we're all aware, does require additional maintenance. I'm uncertain exactly of what the life cycle was of the building when it was originally built. It was built in 1984, but it does not look like it did at that time anymore. But I can do some investigation and come back to you on that. But it is certainly something that personally, I did not feel that it was designed for a 50-year lifespan.
Yeah. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Just one question. When was it last occupied or utilised by the university? Do you know?
It was about 7 years ago. It was pre-COVID. It was used as office space. Yeah.
And it's redundant because there's not enough
COVID
people
changed-
to
yeah.
fill it anymore?
COVID changed a number of things in the way that we work, which I think is not just limited to universities. It became surplus and other spaces were used in lieu of the forestry building. We are considering what the planning would be for it for reinstatement. It is predominantly open plan. It does present some challenges. The original design is a split level. And there are 3 separate levels of open plan, which presents issues for acoustics. It presents issues for accessibility and for the expectations of a modern workforce in their office environment.
Okay. Okay, no further questions. Happy for you to sit in the further discussions, but thank you for your presentation. Much
Thank you.
appreciated.
Cheers.
Okay, PS 3.4, Reverend Sean Burns, Holy Spirit Church, Lavington, IP 10.2 Draft Heritage Review, Public Exhibition, speaking for the recommendation.
The recommendation not to include it in the
Again.
the recommendation there is against the recommendation for
Against,
that the recommendation in the table is that it not be listed as heritage. So for that I am for.
okay.
Look, I don't believe that it should be heritage listed, and the community of Holy Spirit agrees. It's less than 50 years old. It's made of readily available material. It's a building which is its beauty and sort of use for worship is debated among the community. So it's not something which is sort of the feedback is on part. It's not something which the community believes is to be listed on heritage as something particularly stunning or beautiful. It's also not a unique design in and of itself. There's many churches throughout Australia that are semicircular in their design. In this diocese, there is one, for instance, in Coringal, which I believe that this church was based on. So for those reasons, I think it would be mistaken to list it as heritage. I'll leave it to you for questions.
Any questions, councillors? Councillor Callaghan.
Not really a question per se, but well supported by 49 community members who have also objected to the proposed nomination, and understanding that the response was to remove the Holy Spirit Catholic Church from the listing. So I'm sure your congregation are also very happy with that. Thank you for coming this evening.
Just one question for me, Father Burns.
Go. Sorry. Very good. Please.
Not very often we get a fully fledged priest in the chamber, so
Fair enough. Take the opportunity, man.
The prayer before we start the meeting. More importantly, though, the diocese, has there been any feedback from the diocese about this particular listing that you're aware of?
No, not from the diocese itself. It's been handled by the parish, and so there's been no response from the diocese itself regarding heritage. The diocese generally lets parishes try to organise themselves as best they can. If they need any assistance or help, of course, the diocese steps in. Yeah.
Okay. No, thank you for your presentation and thank you for your forthrightness.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Now we'll move into the matter of the Infrastructure Planning Environment Committee meeting for Monday, the 13th of April, 2026. We will start with the opening affirmation acknowledgement of country. Councillor King, thank you very much.
We gather to represent the people of Albury who have entrusted us with this task. May our efforts be blessed with insight, wisdom and common sense. May our personal values give us honesty and courage to serve our community effectively and with respect for all.
1.2, acknowledgement of country. Councillor Glacken.
We would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people as the traditional custodians of the land that we meet upon today, and pay our respects to the elders past, present and future, for they hold the memories, the culture, the tradition and the hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that contribute to our community. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. May be seated. Okay, IPE2 recording, webcasting and meeting. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded under Council's Code of Meeting Practice. By attending, you consent to your image and voice being recorded and published on the Albury City's website. Members of the public are also reminded to refrain from making defamatory comments or disclosing personal information. Albury City is not responsible for comments made by the individuals. Recording and live streams are protected by the copyright and owned by Albury City. No part may be copied, recorded, reproduced or transmitted without the prior written consent of the CEO. Conflict of interest declaration. Do we need to read that other one out again, Mr. McGrath? I'd like you to, just for the purpose of the live stream.
All right. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I do have one conflict of interest declaration. It's from Councillor Callaghan. It's a non-pecuniary, less than significant conflict. The reason given is that Councillor Callaghan has a family member who has submitted feedback on the report IP&E 10.2, which is the draft heritage strategy. Councillor Callaghan has indicated that she intends to stay in the room and participate in debate and voting.
Thank you, Mr. McGrath. Okay, can we have a motion, please, councillors, in relation to our apologies? Councillor King.
I move that Council receive, note and accept the apology of Councillor Bukowski and grant leave of absence for the meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Bullivant.
Happy to second it, Mayor Mac.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. IPE 4.2, attendance by councillors at meeting by audio visual link. We have no attendance in that format. Merrill minute. There is no Merrill minute. Confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting held on the 2nd of March 2026. Thank you, councillors. Councillor King.
I move that the report from the IP&E committee meeting held on the 2nd of March 2026 and reconvened on the 9th of March 2026 be confirmed.
It was a very long meeting. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, so long as I'm recognised as an apology for the second part.
Yes. Thank you. Councillor King, do you wish to speak to that at all?
Thanks.
There appears to be no debate or questions. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. IPE 7, there are no questions with or without notice. IPE 8, notice of motions or rescissions, there are none. IPE 9, presentations and deputations. Could I have a mover to move into committee of the whole? Thanks. Councillor Clacken.
Thank you, through you, to move the recommendation to the councillors that we move the committee into the committee of the whole.
Thank you. Councillor Bullivant.
Happy to second that, Mayor Mac.
Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. So we have IPE 9.1, the long-term financial plan presentation. Mr. Hastie. Mr. McGrath.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, just if I can do a very brief introduction here. Mr. Hastie and his team have gone to quite a bit of work in the last 2 or 3 weeks. And the aim, just to be clear, the aim originally was to have this document as part of the suite of documents that were presented last week. It did need a little more work, and that's why it was deferred till this evening. But when the whole suite of documents do come up to council for consideration and or adoption on the 20th of April, obviously it will be included with the draft budget for next year, the delivery program, et cetera, et cetera. I guess I just wanted to say 2 quick things. One is the importance of the LTFP is to provide some insight for council and the community as to what the potential long-term impacts of council's decisions around adopting the next year's budget might be. And I guess it comes as no surprise that in the base scenario, there is a significant deficit, operating deficit that council is trying to deal with. And to simply not do anything in the way of interventions, you can see the picture of what's likely to happen over the long term. And it's not a particularly advisable thing to ignore, if I can put it that way. The strategy does go on to nominate several scenarios that council could consider. It does not ask council to make a decision this evening. It gives an idea of what those scenarios may look like if they were implemented. But I want to make it clear that consistent with what council adopted, I think it was at the March meeting, an SRV, whilst it might be part of the contemplation, there is a lot more work to be done, and it's been made very clear that there are several further decision points up until November this year before council needs to potentially lock in an SRV and whatever the quantum of that might be. The only other thing I'm going to say, and I hope I'm not stealing Ryan's thunder, but is that in the percentage amounts that are presented in scenarios 2 and 3, those percentage amounts are inclusive of the normal annual rate peg. There's been some assumptions built into the strategy around what the rate peg would be. So just making it clear that they are inclusive of the rate peg amount, not in addition to. And with that, I'm happy to hand over to the Acting Chief Financial Officer.
Thank you, Mr. McGrath. Okay, Mr. Hastie, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, councillors. So this first slide, I guess, as we get into this, that remembering last week we spoke about how as part of the budget build this year, our goal was to present several blue books, in order to help read the budget. So this is a reminder slide in that this long-term financial planning document is to be read in conjunction with our 26-27 operating budget report. So I guess as a reminder to talk about operations before we get into the long-term financial plan, even going back a little bit, our expenditure growth was pretty deliberate going back, during COVID. As part of that, we supported economic stimulus, jobs, community stability. We enabled the growth of a nationally significant regional city, which was the focus of this council. And so if we start to look at next year, We mentioned last week that in the short term, we've got some moderate risk, ultimately because our debt levels, while they are high, are not at a level high enough to warrant extreme risk. However, that does change as we progress throughout the years, as we bring on more debt, which brings us to our long term, which is our 5 to 10 year mark, where we could have structural issues within our profit and loss because of our debt levels. And this has been, the purpose has been to highlight this as part of our long-term financial plan document. I guess, again, before we launch into some of the scenarios, the purpose of this presentation has been created in order to provide the opportunity to discuss these scenarios and their risks within the council chamber. If we then start to look at the different financial scenarios, there are a few that we've presented this year compared to other years. Again, as Steve highlighted, it's there to highlight our trajectory for what we know today and the changes needed that we would need to do in order to adjust that trajectory. And this has purely been done to help in decision making for this group. But we've got our scenarios, our base scenario, which shows our pressures that we have over the next 5 years. And this is our most likely scenario with the information we have today. We highlight how a special rate variation would impact in other scenarios. And again, the way we've tried to write this document is in a way where if scenario 1 is our base, then we want to change one small section of a future scenario in order to show how that change works its way through a scenario. Otherwise, if we've got 10 changes between one scenario and another, it becomes hard to see what's moving the needle. We also talk to expenditure reductions and how difficult it would be in relying solely on expenditure cuts. And again, the purpose of our scenario modelling is to illustrate the trade-offs between continuing on the path that we're at, solely looking toward a special rate variation and or not using any special rate variation option at all. Within the report, it's also important that we highlight some sensitivity analysis because our model shows our best estimates with the information that we have today. However, it's important to communicate that these are estimates. We are trying to look into the future, and that is inherently hard, especially with everything that's going on today. And this is why we do these sorts of sensitivities. Like, it's important that we say, with the models that we've got, what if this changed? And it might be a lower income growth, or it might be rising employee costs or higher construction inflation. So these are all important things for us to understand our models and how they change the trajectory, but also to keep in the back of our mind that in the current environment we're in, we face the potential of changes in these key areas. And again, this has been provided in order to help in decision making. However, it's also best practice in creation of these documents. Part of these documents are going to look at our debt, and it's something that we've spoken about at length in these chambers, how our debt is expected to increase, the risk of it increasing solely within the general fund at unsustainable levels. In this, we reference a ratio, a debt service coverage ratio, and this is a key lending benchmark that our lenders use in order to gauge our ability to repay debt, but also our ability through the Office of Local Government to be seen as financially fit as a council. So scenario 1, again, reflects our most likely forward financial position. no special rate variation has been added as part of this scenario. The modelling shows that the financial position continues to improve gradually, as we've spoken about, but sustainable benchmarks come under financial pressure within 5 years. And this highlights a risk that we might be unable to lend for funds for the renewal of our asset base or the construction of new significant infrastructure within our water and sewer funds. Further to that, with the sensitivities that we have highlighted within the report, it highlights that we run very close to a territory where, in the case of a financial shock, that we could find ourselves in a worse position sooner. So I guess in the purpose of this meeting, in order to discuss scenarios and risk, my question, I guess, to ask, or a thought within this chamber, would be, how does the council group think about this level of risk as part of this scenario? And how do we view it? I guess, and that's the thought, is to talk about each scenario before we get to the next, or I can go through the entire presentation if you wish.
Councillor Glycan, you have a question?
Yes. To ask a question, to enable answers to provide, to lead us towards opportunities to be formulating answers in our own heads for the future meeting. So scenario one, in essence, would be continuing, because there have been some savings already made, on a slowing down of our trajectory, but not really being able to stop the ship or turn it around. My understanding would be also, and this is my real question, my understanding would also be that it would mean, in the medium to longer term, less opportunity for the significant projects that are always required of a growing and developing regional city that is continuing to try and assist with population growth away from, or taking population away from the cities and growing our regional area. Would that be one of the issues that we would face in the medium to longer term with this scenario one base scenario?
Mr. Hasty.
So good question, thank you. I guess scenario one, again, being our most likely scenario, shows that if we just speak to the general fund, the deficit, continues, if not worsens, over the course of the 10 years. Our debt grows to a significant number, plus 250 million. So in answer to, I think there was a first statement around slowing, I think operationally we should think about it as a, there might be small improvements, but as we bring on more debt in order to pay for renewal, the cost of that interest is going to cause a downward pressure on our profit and loss, which ultimately gets to a point where, as shown in the debt service coverage ratio, it bottoms to a point where, the green hatched line, the OLG benchmark, 2029, 2030, we start to breach that line. So the OLG would begin to view us in that realm of, are we futurely fit? But further to that, the 1.5 for T Corp would mean that it would be increasingly difficult for us to request more funds, especially if we were, running down the path. I mean, that's 4 years, 5 years into the 10-year program. So that's 6 years of capital works that we would need to essentially not be able to do.
So in essence, the answer to you've already answered my second question, or second part of the question, and that was with reference to the medium to longer term, those significant projects and programs would not be possible, or decreasingly possible, for what is really a large growing regional city, fastest growing inland regional city in Australia, is my understanding, and that would seriously impact our potential into the future. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hudson, question?
Thank you, Mr. Mack, through you. Just to, I guess, elaborate on Councillor Glacken's question. The water and the sewer infrastructure that we need to build to support our growing population, these are not nice to haves. This is not gold plating. This is essential infrastructure. And so it really sounds to me like this scenario really throws into doubt our ability to continue to deliver that long term. Is that fair to say?
Mr. Hastie.
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mayor Mack. Absolutely it is. Water and sewer infrastructure, the construction of new tanks, in order to continue to maintain adequate water pressure to the growing parts of the city. Our wastewater treatment plant, at times during peak conditions becomes at capacity. So as the city grows, and not just in residential forms, as our industry grows through Nexus, that's going to place more and more load onto our water and sewer infrastructure. And you're absolutely right. At that point, if we were deemed unlendable, then we wouldn't be able to continue with those projects.
And excuse me, and those are like statutory requirements that we provide those things as well as the water authority and water and wastewater authority locally. Is that?
I think from a statutory level, I think we would have our own benchmarks that we set as service levels as part of service provision. So like as the water and sewer fund that collect fees and charges on behalf of the services that they provide, they would have service delivery benchmarks of which we would not be able to meet those benchmarks. Further to that, in regards to areas like sewer, if our sewerage network can't keep up with the sewerage demand, it means often that our sewerage network could overflow, and that would create environmental impacts, which absolutely would be a statutory issue.
And public health, obviously, as well.
And cost, yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Callaghan.
Just want to make a statement. It feels like the base option isn't really an option at all, because if we keep going the way that we're going and spending more that we have and building capital projects and being the fastest growing city and then gold plating everything, we'll be in administration and we'd be bust essentially. So I don't know why we have a scenario one base option. I love that it's there for contextualizing where we can go, but I think it's pretty obvious that scenario one, the base scenario and the way we've been travelling isn't really a scenario at all that we'd really want to face. Thank you.
Question, Councillor Glacken. I hope it's a question.
Thank you. It's a clarifier, really, through you, Mr. Mayor, and it is a question. My question is with reference to the questions just asked by Councillor Hudson, quite rightly, about water and sewer infrastructure, and it's our statutory requirement that that's a service that is provided, and it's Albury City that provides water and sewer. So I'm not having a go at the question asked. It was more to clarify that when we're looking at these scenarios, whilst reference was made to water and sewer, my understanding is that we're really looking at the general rates when we are looking at these scenarios. A knock-on effect would be, as Councillor Hudson has raised, the potential impact of our general rates and accounts against what we may be able to borrow and undertake within water and sewer programs, which are separate funding entities within Albury City Council. If that could just be confirmed, please. That is my understanding, is my question.
Mr. Hastie.
Thank you for the question, and through you, Mac. I would agree with that statement. I think that the base with this question, sorry. Well, the answer to this question is yes. That the purpose of this document is to highlight the situation in which the general fund is in, and in which case it does have a knock-on effect that if, as Albury City is deemed or could be deemed unlendable through lending benchmark ratios, it would have a knock-on effect to the Water and Sewer Fund. However, it would also have consequences within the general fund. So it's not just our ability to not do projects. It would mean it would place significant pressure on our unrestricted cash position.
Thank you. And to clarify, if I may,
Yes.
through a question, it is, my question is, can you confirm that when we're looking at scenario 1, scenario 2, scenario 3, we are looking at the general fund specifically?
Yes, Mr. McGrath wants to answer that question.
Yeah, in broad terms, that's correct. The scenarios that talk about a potential special rate variation is the general fund rates. There would be an ongoing need through the life of the long-term financial plan to look at the charges and fees for sewer and water as well, to make sure they're keeping pace with what's required to deliver on the infrastructure and the operations of those two funds. And while I've got the mic, just one broad clarification, which I was going to try and get in earlier, but I missed, is all of these scenarios are predicated on assumptions here now. And I know that a lot of people don't like the word assumptions, but it is relevant in the context of a long-term financial plan. I think the thing that we need to really, it's stating what is really obvious, but operating expenses outstrips operating revenues year in, year out. And that's why this council and many others have got to the position they're in. So I guess scenario 1, which is the base scenario, means that you're going to get, while you're looking for operational efficiencies now, the pressure is going to be on every year because of that, the mere fact that the operating expenses outstrip operating revenues due to the constraints around raising revenue.
Was your question? No. Okay, Councillor Bullivant, question.
Through you, Mayor Max, a relevant member of staff. Our general fund day to day, we don't just get to see it, but we see numbers as they come through. Just recently, we did apply to T Corp for a financial loan going forward to for the business in general. Have we succeeded in getting that particular bit of finance come through? And looking at the general fund and how we're going to service our things through the general fund going forward, have we got any updates with that?
On the first part, and I may need to get you to ask the second part again, but on the first part, there was some documentation signed today. We've received informal notification that approvals are there. It's just the final paperwork that's being done, and we would anticipate that we'll have that final formal approval sometime in the next week.
Second part?
The second part, hopefully that the amount that we've borrowed will help with the general fund at the moment and our construction going forward.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, correct. My understanding is that the purpose of that loan was to fund the 2025-2026 capital program. There would be, I would assume, some reliance in the long-term financial plan for the next couple of financial years at least to look at borrowings to keep that same body of work going with the capital program. But through some of the scenarios where you look at getting improved cash flows coming in, you would get to the point of reducing your reliance on debt.
Did you have a follow-up question?
No, Mr. McGrath's answered what I was leading to, but I have got a statement, but I'd like to say that at some stage during the debate, during the talk tonight, but I'll leave that at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Just one question back on water and sewer, Mr. Hastie. You note in the report that at capital works in the sewer fund by 2035 would be at, I can't remember the number, it's a significant 236 million deficit. The capital works, does that include Maryvale? expansion out there that you mentioned in the capital works section of the report?
Thank you for the question. So now the capital program for the sewer fund does not yet in this 10-year program outline significant capital works at the Maryvale site. It does, however, highlight wet weather storage that we were speaking about last week and the upgrade of the Waterview sewage treatment plant into the Waterview 2 project. So within the next 10 years, that would give us enough capacity within the system, although due to the time required in order to build a new treatment facility, the planning for that new treatment facility at the Maryvale site would be certainly underway within this 10 years, but it doesn't include significant infrastructure capital within the next 10 years.
So from a projection point of view, to upgrade the current Waterview facility, which I think is doubling in size, is that right? And maintain those projects, can measure it with that, are the projects mentioned as a capital works, which will put us in that deficit by 2036 if nothing is done.
Sorry, could you repeat
That
that?
capital works, the head works on Waterview and the current infrastructure without touching the Thurgoona treatment plant is the result of that deficit in the sewer fund that is listed in the report.
That's correct, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions before we go on to the next part? No? Yes, Councillor Baker.
Thank you. Question through you to Ryan, I think. This is in no way what I'm suggesting should happen, but if we had to get break even in the general fund fast, what would be required to get that, and what sort of services would we cut off? How gutted would the organisation look? And this is not something the path we want to go down, but obviously if you haven't got enough money coming in, what would it look like to council? What wouldn't we do?
Mr. McGrath.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Those sorts of options are available in the next 2 or 3 scenarios that will come forward from Ryan. But I guess, you know, in the context of, once again, I don't want to steal your thunder, but in the context of a straight out cash injection, you know, 40% special rate variation on the general fund, roughly. You could implement it over a couple of years to ease the impact. But that would turn things around that in the medium term, 3 to 5 years, you would start to get to the point of having operating surpluses. I don't think you will ever do it overnight, if I can put it that way. So 3 to 5 years is sort of the medium term. And then it provides the opportunity to build some surpluses after that, that gives council some options about how to utilise those funds, either in redeeming debt or funding ongoing renewal works and avoiding taking more debt, all of which would be a good outcome in the context of the sort of debt profile that you're generating at the moment.
Follow-up?
Sorry, that wasn't exactly my question. If we didn't take a special rate variation or even have it on the table, and we wanted to get to break even in a hurry, what would happen? How severe? Paint a picture of what that would look like.
Mr. McGrath.
Significant impacts on services to the community. You know, you're looking at the present time, approximately $18 million, probably a little more, less some of the efficiencies that are being implemented right now. But, you know, the yield of those efficiencies has not been fully realised, so that's got to be tested. So you wouldn't be talking about just operational efficiencies. You would get to the point of having to deal with levels of service and in some cases maybe considering whole services to be removed from council's portfolio. What they are, I'm not going to even go near, because that would be subject to the elected council's deliberations and subject obviously to significant community engagement as well.
Did you have a follow-up?
Only that it's probably worth just understanding how dire that would look and how gutted the organisation would be and what you can't do. I just think it's worth understanding as a scenario, as well as, you know, if it was dramatic and drastic, what would happen. Ryan, is that? I don't. Yeah.
Mr. McGrath.
Yeah, and just one more thing which I did leave out. There would be a need for significant workforce engagement, because at the end of the day it means staff.
Thank you. Question, Councillor Hudson.
Really more just a statement to concur with Councillor Baker. I think that kind of information would be useful, not just for us as elected councillors, but also for the community.
Thank you. Mr. Hastie, Councillor Bullivant, did you have a question?
More of a statement, Mayor Mac. Interestingly enough, when I wasn't a councillor, we were building a city of significance, and over the last 10 or 11, 12, 13 years, we've built a city of significant debt. And, you know, debt is good in some scenarios, but at this particular time, with what we're contending with within the council group, it's not a good thing. And really, we've got to look at all our scenarios available. SRB is only one way of getting to where you need to go. We need to look at all options within the business. We need to look at all options within the community and keep our community formed, because I can tell you now that this is going to ramify through Albury. It's going to be huge. It's different scenarios we've got to look at, but we as a councillor group have got to make decisions for the best interest of our community and our business. Sometimes you've got to step up and make a decision whether you like it or not. It's uncomfortable, but what I look at in the financial figures, and I've spoken to Ryan and Gail about these figures, and the crossover market, you know, at no SRB scenario, 10 years time, we'll still have a $6 million debt. Then we'll be looking for another SRB at some stage. So hard decisions have got to be made on behalf of the community sometimes, and unfortunately, we're the group that has inherited this, and we've got to be putting our best foot forward for the community to make the community realise what we're at, where the council's at. And people talk about legacies in council and they talk about what they've done in council. Well, the only legacy I can see that we're going to make is we're going to be the council group that has looked at and got the financial situation back in order. And that for me, in where I sit in Albury, that will be good enough for me with my community, because I think that's what they require of us and what we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hastie, did you wish to continue on scenario 2? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Councillor Mack. And I should say to Councillor Baker, thank you for your question. I think there's part of scenario 4 where we'll get into a little bit more detail with that, if it's helpful as part of the discussion. But if we look to scenario 2, so again, part of the modelling exercise is to say, well, scenario 1, which is our base scenario, and has been said here tonight, is not a real option, and I would agree with that, and that's the reason why we've done the scenario. But it's also the most likely, because of it's hard to make these decisions. But if we look to scenario 2, if we change one item, which is our revenue, so as Mr. McGrath's mentioned, our expenses outstrip our revenue and has done for many years. And so for most entities, often is the way to look at your revenue base rather than your expense base. Not saying that this is what council needs to do, but this scenario provides that option. So scenario 2 highlights a 42% increase, a special variation to rates over 2 years. As has been mentioned, that's cumulatively, which includes the CPI within that specific year. So at 42%, if we had, say, for example, 4% in one year and then 4% the next, the real increase would be 42 less 8, if that makes sense. what this model does is it focuses on strength within the general fund. It allows our ability through the charts in the model to essentially our debt grows until the point where we have the special rate variation, then it tails straight off. I think from memory, debt in the general fund, I think it's just below 100 million. So it provides us a position. Yeah, so it reaches just about 100 million at the end of the 10-year period. So this is a way, in this scenario, it allows council and the general fund to be able to repay its debt through the general fund and allow debt to grow within the water and sewer fund to allow for that infrastructure. That increase in cash flow means that we can use that cash flow to pay for the renewal of assets within the general fund. But as is stated later in the report with the sensitivity analysis, it provides us a cushion for if we were to have a sensitivity come upon us, say higher inflation for a number of years. It shows as part of the debt service coverage ratio that we are above our fit, sustainably fit as per the OLG. But that's one of many benchmarks that we look at, and it helps bring the general fund back to an operating break even. So if we wanted to continue with discussion around scenario 2, how do we feel that this scenario is viewed when considered between affordability, sustainability, and overall the services that we provide to our community?
Councillor Callaghan, question?
Thank you, Mayor Mac. Through you to most relevant, Mr. Hasty. What does a 42% special rate variation over 2 years look like for the average rate payer? So what is the additional that they're paying each year?
Mr. Hasty.
Thank you for the question through you, Mayor Mac. I'm trying to do this in my head now. 120. Off the top of my head, as a rate payer within Albury, remembering that it's a cumulative amount, it's probably about $500
per year.
Per year. And that is over the 2 years. So again, if we think about myself, I'm a rate payer. I pay, $1,300 in Taguna. Then it's between $500 to $600 per year.
So we're talking about $1,000 on average over the 2 years at a 42% special rate variation on top of the current rates.
Correct. Yeah. Over the whole period though. So yeah, 500 additional over the 2 years.
Yep.
Yep.
Over 2 years.
Yep. How about that? That's $1,000. Thank you.
No.
$500.
500.
Oh, over the 2 years. Apologies. Sorry, not annually.
Correct. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Question, Councillor Glacken?
Thank you. Yes, my question through you to the most relevant member of staff, whomever that might be. With reference to the discussion about and I suppose the context of expenses have been outstripping revenue for a number of decades. And just to confirm with you, my understanding is that the rate peg has always been below what we use as the rate rise, the CPI. And I use the term loosely CPI. I know it's a number of measures, but if we use it the CPI measure, the rate peg has for decades been below CPI, and therefore we have actually been, our income and potential income has been decreasing over the last 30 or 40 years since the introduction of the rate peg. Is that correct?
Mr. Hasty.
Thank you for the question through you, Mayor Mac. I think I'd need to think more about how it's affected a council over a 30-year period. But certainly the calculation of the rate peg through a local government CPI factor has been in line with what you would see, in CPI figures. That said, the cost to renew our assets, and even during our COVID period, and this is sort of, in my perspective, where this has changed a lot, because we've gone from a low inflation environment into a much higher inflation environment. And that's meant that we can't, as an entity, say, well, if we're only going to get 4% increase in our income, we're only going to pay an extra 4% on the supply of concrete. Or, if we've got engineers that we need to hire as part of key infrastructure, we're only going to put that up by 4% because the market in some way dictates what we have to pay for these services. So I think what we've shown through some of our reports is that in key areas such as materials and services, the cost of renewals, employee costs, they have been over and above what we've been able to get back. And then that essentially creates part of the problem that we have.
Thank you. So clarifying, the rates that we have been able to raise due to the limited ability via the rate peg have been less than our increasing expenses over a significant number of years. Thank you very much for clarifying that, Mr. Ryan. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Hudson, question?
Thank you, Mayor Mac. Through you to the most relevant member of staff. Following on from Councillor Glacken's questions relating to the rate peg, which I think is very, very good question. Developer contributions is another area or another revenue source for council, which my understanding is essentially does not meet the costs that are imposed. So could a staff member please just remind me how have developer contributions been implemented over the past decade or so in the LGA? I know we've made a change to them recently, and I believe we're going to be making a further change, but that would be useful to know.
Mr. McGrath.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hudson. Developer contributions are normally only applied, as we know, to capital style works as a result of the development that occurs, or with a nexus to the development that occurs. And it is fair to say that rarely do the infrastructure needs that come with growth, rarely are they totally offset by developer contributions. And in fact, once you get to a certain level of developer contributions, there is a cap that is imposed by the state. And unless you go to IPART with a special case to have that cap elevated, you are stuck at the cap. So there is a significant gap. Many councils incur that significant gap, particularly in high growth areas as well.
Sure. Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. McGrath. I understand we changed our developer contributions scheme in an interim fashion up to the $20,000 cap, which doesn't require the additional IPART review. I believe prior to that, though, our contribution scheme was substantially lower than that, and also substantially lower than comparable other regional centres. So just hoping to sort of get a bit of an understanding of how that has impacted, because obviously noting that any shortfall in infrastructure cost recovery essentially through the developer contributions has to be made up for through our rate base.
Mr. Christie, can you provide a local context? Thanks.
Yep. Thank you for the question. And for you, Mayor Mac, I won't be able to give you the exact quantum in terms of overall collection, but you are right. As we outlined in the report for the interim contributions planned in the middle of last year, that at that stage, our contributions for 712 out of Faguna were approximately $12,000 a lot. That interim review indicated they should be at around $25,000, $26,000 per lot if it was for more full cost recovery. We did hit the cap of $20,000 with that plan, and we do have a future plan in our 4-year delivery plan, future budget items to then. Obviously now we've got the adopted Figunalinga precinct structure plan, a few other items to do a new contributions plan, which would require seeking approval of IPART to go above that cap of $20,000. I couldn't tell you precisely what the quantum of figures is because you'd have to look at how many lots were created, etc. But it was around that $8,000 per lot is what it went up in July 25.
Just one final follow-up question on this matter then. Acknowledging that we haven't yet done the work to increase to the higher cap, the $30,000 cap, is there any possibility of having that increase modelled in this information that we're receiving? I'm assuming that everything that we're talking about now doesn't presume that we would be increasing above what we already have increased the developer contribution cap to. Is that fair to say?
Mr. Christian.
Yeah, I would have to just, thank you for the question for you, Mayor Mack. I'd have to just check with Ryan. I'm assuming the contributions assumed the current figure of $20,000 per lot. So the current scenarios assume the $20,000 figure per lot, haven't assumed what we don't know, which is what that figure may equate to into the future.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. We can't put the cart before the horse, but it would presumably make a meaningful difference to what we're talking about though.
And just to add to that, there was a number of submissions put into the government and IPART about reviewing the cap and increasing the cap so that we can be in alignment with what's currently happening in the supply chain. And it's under consideration. LG New South Wales submitted a comprehensive submission. So watch this space. Councillor Callaghan, question?
Thank you to the most relevant staff member. Since Christie, just hoping someone can remind me how many renters live in our LGA?
Who can answer that question? Does anyone want to put their hand up?
Roughly?
Mr. Christie?
I should remember, I can't.
30%,
Yeah.
30?
Yep. Thank you for the question. I think from our last survey, I think we popped some stuff in. It was around 30%.
Oh, 30.
Off the top of my head. We did do some stuff, and it might be more Mr. Hennon, but there was some stuff that came through in the Micromex survey that you got when it talked around that mix and who we did or didn't interview. Off the top of my head, it's recollected around 30%.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying. I thought it was about 35% as well. But my worry with this is to a household, it's on average $500 over the 2 years, but a 42% increase will be passed on to a renter. And I can't imagine that that's ever going to revert back. So I feel like that's a 42% increase that'll be carried on to the rental market forever. That's just the reality, I think, of when things go up, they don't tend to come back in that space. But just my observation. Thank you.
Mr. McGrath?
Just for clarification, I just from that statement, I might be making the obvious, but the rate increase would be carry on as well. It doesn't drop off after 2 years. So similar to ratepayers and renters would be subject to the same outcome.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Hasty, next part, thanks.
So moving on to scenario 3, and I would agree with the statements that we've made that this is a hard option to make, absolutely. So in which case scenario 3, then keeping with the same theme of adjusting one small section, is that if we take scenario 2 and we look to have the same type of outputs. So within the report, we don't have all the charts as part of scenario 3 because they're pretty much the same as scenario 2. So if we said scenario 2 is not an option that we would like to go down, then we could move into an option where we were reducing services. Scenario 3 has been created to highlight an offset or a reduction, a complete expense reduction of $3.5 million within our expense base. And that would mean that the special rate variation, instead of being 42%, would only be 38%. Again, just to be able to provide context on if we wanted to put ourselves into the position where the general fund breaks even, debt service coverage ratios in a healthy position. We've got buffers financially in the case of some sensitivity. Then we would need to reduce 3.5 million in expenses. 3.5 million has been selected by myself because I feel that it is a significant amount to see reduce as part of our total expenses. Scenario 4 goes on to a different scenario that we'll talk about in a moment, but scenario 3 has been created with if we were to think about reducing our expenses because we don't want to see as high an increase through an SRV, there is still significant service reduction as part of this scenario 3. So I guess in order to help with discussion, I'm interested in the thoughts or any questions from the councillors considering this scenario compared with the other two, like I guess how we view scenario 3 in relation to number 2 or into number 1.
Thanks, Mr. Hastie. Just to clarify before I take questions, the wages expenditure is quite high. Can you remind me what it is previously and currently, please?
Thank you for the question. Off the top of my head, I think we're looking at around 68, 69 million
currently
for this current year, and in which case next year is there have been some roles reduced, but ultimately it's an increase through the modelling that I think we've put in about 4.5% because we realise that the upcoming award negotiations will be between 4 and 5. So 72 sort of comes to mind.
Yeah,
that's where we are now. Where we've been moving back, I don't have those numbers in front of me on exactly what the employee cost numbers were and how far back, but I can provide that with notice.
Well, so I understand that I think it was around 76 million at one point or 73 in between that figure, 73 million. But we have actually not filled roles that were unfilled at the time. Has that made a huge difference to the current figure, which is 70, you're saying, is it?
Thank you for the question again. This is where payroll budgeting ultimately can get tricky. Like the way we do it is every role that's been approved within the structure, we have a budget for. But we know that, I mean, at the moment, the number escapes me. I think there's about 100 vacant positions within our structure now, which there's been an executive decision to hold on some of those positions because of the position we're in. That creates an offset for our wages, which is why our wages will be better than it was last year, because some of those roles that have left Albury City, we've decided to not re-employ, if that answers your question.
But there's also a significant employer obligation in the money that's held in the bank for that workforce too.
Correct. So we have a part of our balance sheet, which is our employee liability. So as an employee, any leave that I have that's available to me is sitting within our balance sheet, which is stored in cash, is an amount that's a restricted amount.
Thank you. Mr. McGrath?
Mr. Mayor, if I can just add to it, I think to provide some context, there is a review that's being undertaken right now, looking at some of those issues around vacancies. That I understand it was the recruitment moratorium, if I can call it that, was put in place about March last year. The converse side to that is there are certain parts of the organisation where there is significant pressures in delivering external services to the community, and that's something that's being worked through as well. And some of those areas, and I don't want to get into naming them, but some of them are in areas where the Micromex survey results late last year indicated that council needed to be really delivering on some of those key areas. So it's a balancing act, I think, is the message. And we're trying to work through some of the issues around that now.
Thank you. Councillor Glycan, question.
Thank you. Can I wish to ask two questions. One is to seek clarification. Councillor Callaghan raised a question about, or made reference to, what did she ask a question? Made reference to the costs of either scenario 2, or it was back to scenario 2. I think it was going up by 17% per the SRV would be 17%. In addition, for the 2 years. A reference was made to the rates notice and the percentage of renters. I'm not aware, are there any facilities or services where someone who rents a property is treated differently to the person who owns and resides in that property? I'm not aware why there would be a difference raised by Councillor Callaghan. I just want to make sure that there is no difference to the person who either rents or owns and lives in a property.
Mr. McGrath.
Mr. Mayor, I can't think of any service that discriminates or advantages whether based on your tenure in a property. So whether you're a resident using council services, they're all charged the same and they receive the same service to a large extent, regardless of whether they're a renter or a ratepayer in general terms. And I'm happy to stand corrected, but I cannot think of any service where it would delineate between a renter and a ratepayer.
So just confirming, it would therefore be a fair allocation or a fair avenue for income generation, because it would be applied fairly across the rate base.
Mr. Mayor. I can't answer that directly because that would be ultimately up to the landlords to decide with their strategies as to how they would pass on or not pass on to renters. But in general terms, it's not unusual for landlords to pass on increased costs to the renter.
Yes, noting that it would be the if a person owned the property, they would be paying it, and therefore someone who's renting it, if it's passed on, then they would be paying it too. So that would be an equal allocation. Yeah, because if you own it, you've got to pay for it anyway. Okay, just want to clarify that. The other is, I note that scenario 2 and 3 looks at rate variation over 2 years each time. What are the impacts should council agree at some stage to an SRV, but over, say, 3 or even 4 years? What are the implications of spreading that over that longer period?
Mr. Hastings.
Thank you for the question through you, Mayor Mac. It's a great question. Ultimately, what you find when you start to review IPART's decisions around special rate variations is that you often have councils that spread a special rate variation, especially one of any significance, is deemed by the community over a number of years. So it's not uncommon to see them spread over 4 years. The implication of doing that is the compounding effect of having it early. So if we have, for example, 40% in 1 year, then we start at this base, and that means that we grow on top of that base every single year. If we start lower, then it means that in order to get the same output, the special rate variation doesn't affect I guess it looks larger on paper because you're not getting it earlier, if that makes sense. So if we were to spread this out over 4 years, which is absolutely possible, it would just mean that it might be, again, I'd we'd need to do the numbers, but it might be 8 or 10 or 11% over a number of years in order to get the same amount, because we don't get it all early, if that makes sense. So it would seem larger on paper, but ultimately the ratepayer still finishes at the same place.
Okay, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, is it possible when we're looking more closely at these scenarios in the future, we could have an example of like a graph of what they would be if we
Cumulative
did them over
effects.
the 3 or the
Yeah.
4 years, noting that, you know, if you own the house or you rent the property, and you're using those facilities and services, then paying for those facilities and services, or for the SRV, would seem fair. But it might be an opportunity to compromise on, so for example, 3 years, but we need to look at that as a figure and see how that graph times out. My memory was that the last, which was then an SVR, I think was over a 4-year period, about 12 or 15 years ago. I'm pretty sure it was generated over a 4-year period. And so I'm keen to see how the community might view taking it over a longer period, understanding, of course, that there's greater gain for a shorter period from our perspective as council, but from a community perspective, might the community find it more palatable if we took it over a longer period of time? But would we have to increase that total amount? So instead of looking at the 42 and the 38, would we be looking at the 43 and a 39 to make that? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hudson, question?
Thank you, Mayor Mac, through you to Mr. Hasty. I'm just trying to tease out essentially the difference between the 42% scenario 2 versus scenario 3, and why we would say choose scenario 3 over 2. And so just bear with me while I'm just going to lay out my thinking. So you mentioned, Mr. Hasty, that a 42% would be roughly equivalent to about a $500 difference over a 2-year period. So by that token, I assume that a 38% would be going off the difference, about $450 $50 over that 2-year period. Now, the data that I could find said that in 23-24, we had 24,343 rateable properties in the LGA. So I'm going to assume 25,000 this year. 3.5 million spread over 25,000 rateable properties is $140. So to me, it seems that if the difference between a 42% SRV and a 38% is about $50, but we're also making $3.5 million in cuts, which is equivalent to $140 per rateable property, it seems to me that scenario 3 still a fairly large cut in services in comparison to the difference that each household, if you want to think of it that way, is paying for the. Does that? I know it's a bit complicated, but do you follow my logic? So what I'm saying is the value. Yes, people are paying. Yes, if we were to go with a 42%, obviously the increase to rates is more. But the service reduction they would receive with the $3.5 million is more significant again than that difference. Is that fair to say?
Mr. Hasty.
Thank you for the question through you, Mayor Mac. That's a great assessment. It's a great way to think of it. I should also say, there's a disclaimer off the top of my head, that $500 or $600, we'd obviously need to do that sort of work. And there's some complexity in that the rate base is made up of lots of different types of properties, you know, so we've got farmland and we've got residential and everything else. So we'll have a slightly different impact to all. But your logic is correct. You know, like we need to think about, well, I guess the reason these two have been presented like this is to be able to show the difference in how we could make a decision. If the decision was made that we wanted to not proceed with a scenario 2 in order to get the same outcome, then we would need to, and again, if we were focused on 3.5 million, which I think you are correct, I think in certain parts of the community that would have significant impacts. But that's the quantum. It's more just there to highlight the quantum required if we decided, or if the decision was made to not go wholly into an SRV. If we were to say, well, you know what, we need to make real reductions in services because it's not fair to some parts of our community. It's more just the presentation to show the quantum in how we would think about it.
Yeah, thank you. And if I could then make just a quick comment to that, I suppose what I would say is that given that there is different ways and the rates that people pay are relative to the value of the property that they live in, that the impacts of this is likely to be highly inequitable in its distribution. I would suggest that, and I'm not basing this off any data, but I would suggest that people who are of a lower income and live in a lower value property, yes, obviously a 42% or a 38 or whatever quantum we end up choosing is going to be a significant increase for them. However, I would worry that the reduction in our services may disproportionately impact them more than a wealthier family who lives in a much, if you live on Doctors Point Road or in the nice parts of West Albury and you're in a $2 or $3 million property, yes, I guess it's going to be more of an increase in your rates, but I would suggest that those households are much more capable of absorbing that impact than our lower income ones. So I think that what I'm saying is whatever we end up choosing to do, we do need to think really carefully about the level of service-related cost reductions, cuts to services that we implement, because I think the impact will be inequitably distributed.
Mr. McGrath.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just there's one piece of information that I think is important in the context of this piece of information here. I'm going to be a little bit provocative and suggest that the 3.5 million in ongoing service-related cost reductions may not all be reductions in services. It may come from operational efficiencies. Yeah, absolutely. So I don't think we should lose sight of the need for the organisation to go through a process where it is examining itself and demonstrating to the community that we're serious about how we go about our business. I think that's a good message to send in whatever scenario you pursue at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, I absolutely agree. I think we have to demonstrate that we are getting our house in order, and that if we can if there are efficiencies to be gained, then absolutely we should be doing those.
Councillor Bullman, question.
Thank you, Mac. To the relevant member of staff, given that we're looking at ways of getting our general fund back in order, and with a few capital projects coming online, I have fears with some of the material costs of building structures and labour and things like that. Some of our projects may be a little bit hindered in development. Have we got any assumptions going forward that we might have potential cost impacts, because it's going to affect the general fund straight away? So, and I'll use the Splash Park, AEC, things like that we know that they're projects we've got coming forward. But have we done any assumptions on that the potential impact to the general fund?
Mr. Hastie.
Thank you for the question through you, Mayor Mac. As part of the 26-27 report, I think it's mentioned in here. For now, the work we have done speaks to what we know and what we've seen through our suppliers, and as such, we've had a between 300 and 1 million increase in operating expenses as a result of high inflation. You're exactly right, though. Like, this is the sort of This is exactly why we've written our sensitivity as part of this report, because it's absolutely possible that we're going to have increases in prices to construct certain assets. I guess regarding how that might change the current projects we've got, I'm sure that our project teams in delivery have started to look at that, but it's not information that I have here today. What I would mention though is that a part of what we've tried to do in making this budget, and even what was started in last year, was that the projects within our system we've tried to significantly reduce. And even in the last 7 months, we've tried to delineate the difference between a generational project and a non-generational project, something that we have to renew. I think if we look at those two buckets separately, our non-generational projects are going to get more expensive. Yep. And we're going to have to pay because we need to renew assets. If we don't, it tends to cost more later down the track. All those assets blow up and it creates more costs that we need to fix. It's our ability to say yes or no to generational projects. And when they are important within the city, we need to manage those projects as best we can.
Thank you. Councillor Callaghan, question?
No,
No.
sorry. Do I have a press? Apologies.
The button was depressed. Councillor Hudson.
Thank you, Mayor Mac. Further to, I suppose, what I was asking, or the statement that I made before, but also possibly the question that Councillor Callaghan asked in relation to renters. And this is certainly not a knock against the work that you've done so far and your team so far, Mr. Hasty, and I really appreciate the effort that you have put in. As far as the sensitivity analysis, if throughout this SRV formulation process and finally coming to the decision on whether we go ahead with it or not, that we will make in the future, what analysis are we likely to do in relation to looking at the impact that it will have on our community and looking at the distribution of the impact? For example, I would be interested to know, landlords will of course pass on the increase to their tenants, or maybe they won't. What typically happens? That sort of thing that I would be interested to see, because I think it's all well and good for us to work out what's best for the business from a financial perspective, and obviously we need to do that. But I think we also really need to take into account the impact that it will have on the community as well. So I'm just interested to know what kind of information we're likely to receive in that regard.
Mr. Hasty, Mr. McGrath, which one is it?
Thank you for the question through Mayor Mac. So the SRV process, there's certainly a part of it where we have to calculate how this change would have a cumulative effect to each ratepayer. That's I guess the way IPART has structured the application is that you have to go through that process. And then the most important part of being able to get an approval around that special rate variation is that you've adequately communicated that change to the city. And so, again, part of that work would be the use of a firm like Micromex, like we've used recently for community surveys, to be able to say, did you understand, what did you understand before you were engaged, and what did you understand post what you're engaged? So I guess in answer to your first thought, how it changes or how this change would affect our certain ratepayers and how it's communicated is almost the largest part of this process. And it's something that we would have to, obviously share with council, but we have to share as part of the community consultation, the engagement for this. I can't speak to how it might impact a renter or a landlord. I mean, if I'm a landlord and my costs go up, that doesn't necessarily mean I can pass those costs on. It depends on what's available in the market. So there are, but coming back to your first thought, the communication of what would happen, what would change, and then that happening to the council group and to the broader city is a big part of this job if we decide to go down the path of an SRV.
Thank you.
Mr. Hastie, you may continue.
Thank you. So moving on to scenario 4, and I guess thank you, Councillor Baker, for the earlier question. The reason this scenario has been provided is in order to show the quantum if the decision amongst the council chamber was to not have a special rate variation. It again has a similar output to what we've seen in scenarios 2 or 3, but it would be extensive as far as service rationalisation and removal. In answer to your question earlier, it is very difficult to mention what could we see go, like how gutted could council be, because it depends on where you make that change. But to give you an idea around the quantum of the number that we're looking at, one of the largest areas of council is our city landscapes team. So weeds, botanic gardens, high profile areas, grass, sports fields, that whole area costs about $16.5 million. So if we were to just not do any of that, which is something that we would never do because you'd tell pretty quick, we're not there yet. We haven't reached the number. But scenario 4 has been created in order to highlight the quantum. It is not a recommendation, but it is there to show the level that we'd need to act if we had no appetite for a special rate variation. This really concludes the discussion around the 4 scenarios. So I guess we could move on to next steps unless there's any other questions or thoughts regarding the 4 scenarios as they've been presented.
Councillor Glyden.
Thank you. Through you to the most relevant member of staff. With reference to scenario 4, operational savings of $20 million, that would be per annum. So every year, and noting that our expenses have always been greater than our ability to generate our own income via rates because of the rate cap. In other words, the gap every year gets larger and larger and larger, which is really the main reason why we're discussing at the moment a special rates variation is because it's a cumulative effect over a number of years that we are in this position. It is not one thing, not one project. It's not an accumulation of projects. It's the fact that our operating costs have always outstripped our ability through the rates, our rating ability because of the rate cap. When again would we be at the point where we are now suggesting, and a theoretical option is option or scenario 4, saving $20 million. When would we get to another point down line if we didn't have a special rates variation and we continue to be able to rate less than our operating expenses are on an annual basis? When would we again get to that point where we would be saying, oh, well, there's a scenario 4. Would that be 5 years, 10 years for us to be talking to our community again? How are we going to solve this problem? We're in this situation at the moment because our rates can't increase as much as they need to because of the rate peg. So at which point, if we save $20 million every year, at which point would that $20 million every year become $25 million that we would have to save? At which point would we be again discussing special rates variation? Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Hastie.
Thank you for the question through you, Mayor Mac. Ultimately, we'd need to model it. I mean, that's it in a nutshell. However, part of this scenario is in highlighting that it's not just not palatable, it's not possible, you know. If we were to turn off major areas, we would only have to pay a subcontractor in order to fix these parts anyway. But in coming back to your initial thought, if there was a way to do it, which again, as far as I'm concerned in being able to provide advice, I don't think it could be done. But you're right, there is a risk that if we were to cut so hard that if we have a future where we've got the cost of materials stay higher and the costs of inflation and therefore employee costs stay higher, then yes, you're right. We would get, assuming that there aren't changes to the rate peg, because I know it's ongoing debate, then yes, you're right. It would take strong financial management to essentially whittle away operating budget in order to keep in line with the increases we would have through the rate peg. So I think it's fair to say that in any of these scenarios, this is a risk that we face, and it's all the more reason to make sure that we are, for no other reason, we're taking into consideration that this is something that's happened since COVID, and it will probably likely happen, you know, for a while.
Thank you. I also remember a prior period of the global financial crisis where something similar happened, which is around the time when we started talking about the special, as it was then, variation of rates in my earlier time on council. So I just to confirm, my thoughts are the reality is, just as there are countries in the world that have inflation rates that mean that people are carrying or, you know, taking their money around in a wheelbarrow to go and buy a loaf of bread. I foresee that should this go unchecked and we make these short-term savings for sustainability's sake, but don't deal with an special rates variation, that we will end up very quickly back in this scenario, and we'll be asking, you know, our community again. So I think you're right. And as you have suggested, this is not a scenario you're suggesting, but this is in contrast to the other end of the spectrum, which was scenario 1. This is scenario 4, and then we've got scenario 2 and 3 in the middle is my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Hudson?
Thanks, Mayor Mac. I think Councillor Glecker and I have very similar trains of thought this evening. I know it's unusual, but I think that I guess in furtherance to the questions asked by, through you, Mayor Mac, to the most relevant member of staff, a cut of that magnitude without specifying any particular area or any service that council provides that would be eliminated or very substantially cut. I think that there would be really substantial opportunity costs to doing this, not just from the perspective of not being able to or be financially sustainable and then have to go back and do this again in 5 or 10 years, but also what else are we losing? What capacity are we, because by doing this, we wouldn't be investing in our people, you know, who our council staff are people who live in our community. They have families that they support, but they spend their money in the local economy. They spend it in cafes, they employ tradies and builders and all of those sorts of things, mechanics, buy new cars, all of that kind of thing. And so I really wonder if we were to go down this kind of scenario path, what would the flow-on effects be to the local economy? Because I think they would be really substantial. It's much more than just $20 million, which again, if I can go back to my 25,000 rateable properties, it amounts to $800 per household. I think the impact would likely be substantially more than that from a flow-on effect. But also, what do we miss out on, or what would our community miss out on by having those cuts to this organisation, which means down the track we're not able to provide the higher quality services that they come to expect. We don't upskill our staff. We don't invest in our internal capacity. You know, we become more and more reliant on external contractors and all of that sort of thing. Companies and organizations which don't have the same buy-in to this community, the same community pride and all of that sort of thing that I know that our staff do. So I suppose, could you speak to that? What do you think I'm asking how long is a piece of string, but what is the likely, or what kind of flow on effects do you think having a cut of this magnitude would have in the broader local economy and the long-term capacity building of the organization?
Mr. Hastings.
Thank you for the question through you, Mayor Mac. Certainly, I'd like to start my answer with my experience and what I know and what I don't know. So what I know is, you know, being able to run management accounting within a local government organisation. My ability to then look at how that affects the local economy is somewhat is not something I've done professionally. However, one person's income is another person's expense. And so there's lots of places that talk about, certainly within some financial markets, that talk about how as an economy starts to shrink and you've got major employment that reduces within an economy, then yes, you're right, it's felt. There are good public examples of large capital cities within America where they've had major industries that have been lost, and then that has a significant impact in the city overall. Coming back to what it would mean for our staff, I think, yes, you're right, it would be lots of efficiency measures that have been previously mentioned, and then that has its own practical results. So if you've got staff that have been with the organisation for 10 or 15 or 20 years and they're no longer there, then you lose all of that experience. I guess further to that, what this council has strategically tried to do over the last 8 years is to build a city of significance, a regional city of significance. And I would think that that would pretty much go against that strategy completely. Like, so there's definitely an impact on staff, the reduction of the internal skills if people were to leave. I think, although I'm not adequately qualified to say how it would impact our economy, but I think it would. And ultimately, I think the way it would be felt is in the city's ability, like the reduction of the strategy that this council has been chasing for some time. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Callaghan.
Thank you. First of all, I'd just probably like to clarify what I was trying to get at earlier with regards to homeowners. And I was asking that because 30 to 35% of our population are not to be forgotten through this process. And according to the Reserve Bank of Australia, while council levy rates on property owners, these are operational costs for landlords and are frequently passed on to tenants. Unlike homeowners who may see their property value increase due to the infrastructure projects funded or supported by an SRV, renters pay for these improvements through higher rent without gaining any ownership or equity. And we can just see this on the news day in and day out when we've got lines of up to 40 people trying to vie for a rental property. There's also cumulative stress. Renters already spend a high proportion of their income on housing. It's typically 26 to 28% of their gross income, compared to that of 15.5% of mortgage holders, leaving them with less spare cash flow to absorb these current cost of living crisis. So sorry I wasn't as clear earlier before, but I hope that articulates what I was asking in regards to renters. I have a question as well, if I may. Just originally it was floated to the councillor group, an SRV in the order of 14 to 20%. That's not what has been proposed to us here this evening. I'm just curious, had those figures been floated or tinkered with too, and how did we get from 14 to 20 to now 38 to 42?
Mr. McGrath.
Mr. Mayor, I think it's only fair that I take that because those figures, when they were modelled, at the end of 10 years, still left council with an operating deficit. it did not get close to the balancing the budget in the general fund. And if council's serious about achieving financial sustainability, it's not just the debt service coverage ratio that you need to hit. There's a number of key indicators, operating performance ratio, the asset renewal gap, all those sorts of things need to be considered. And the less money you have in the way of cash surpluses, or at least hitting a surplus, or having cash after the capital income side of things is dealt with, the less money you have to fund infrastructure renewal, et cetera, in particular, let alone generational assets without reliance heavily on debt, that, as the CFO has already indicated, has an impact on the operating bottom line as well, with increased interest expense, et cetera. So these scenarios have been modelled on the basis of getting to a true operating surplus position, or at least a balance. And longer term in the strategy, it does start to generate some, on the face of it, what appear to be some reasonable surpluses. But I think the proof would be in the pudding because of that issue around annually operating expenses outstripping annual revenues anyway. But if you did have surpluses, you have some strategic capacity to deal with funding your capital program with those surpluses instead of utilising debt. And there's a balance in that with intergenerational equity, but it gives council some significant options in the longer term.
Thank you. You have a follow-up?
Wait.
Councillor Bullivan?
Thank you, Mayor Mac. To the through you to the relevant member of staff. Given that Mr. Hastie's given us numerous scenarios tonight, which I thank him and his team for putting the scenarios up. And if the council group didn't have the appetite to look at an SVR as some rate, and we went for scenario 4, and given the current trend lines of the business with the finances, how long before the Office of Local Government come knocking on the door and our borrowing capacity becomes tainted even more?
Mr. Hastings?
Thank you for the question. I just want to ask for some clarity on that. So that's assuming we went down the scenario 4 option. How long would it take? So as far as scenario 4 goes, scenario 4 has the same outputs as scenario 2 and 3. So they are not represented in charts because, again, the outline, the purpose of the reading is to say, here's where we're going. Now, if we wanted to get to this position where we have no risk, we have, as mentioned, the strategic ability in 8 or 9 years to begin further generational projects for the city. We've completely reduced our risk to be able to have infrastructure for water and sewer. If that's our goals, we could do it with scenario 2, 3 or 4. They're just different ways to do it. At the moment, my advice is that scenario 4 is not an option that could be done. So in answer to your question, we would get there with scenario 4. It's just being able to find that saving, which it would be almost impossible in my mind. Like it's such an enormous part of our expense base.
Yeah, and that's why I asked the question, because looking at the different scenarios that we've got put on the table, I can see which direction the finance team are trying to head in, and I some of the stuff I agree with, and we'll just work our way through it.
Councillor Baker, question?
Well, it's nearly a statement. I think the discussion has been really, really good, and I, for one, in no way support any draconian austerity measures, because I don't think they work, and it just cuts and shrinks and takes away why a lot of people live here anyway. But I think the community needs to understand what the discussions are about, and goes through all the scenarios and the worst case and the best case. But yeah, I think you've done a really good job in setting it out for us, and I think we need to have many more of these discussions before we can get the feedback from community.
Thank you. Councillor Callahan, did you have that follow-up ready?
I do, and I feel like I've been waiting and waiting to hear what everyone's views are. But I think I spoke at our last council meeting about an SRV, and I think we really need to be real about this. And the plan asks the community to pay for a decade of poor financial decisions, and a 42% or a 38% SRV is not a solution. It's currently looks like a bailout, and we should fix the problem, not pass the bill on to families where we can. And as stated here this evening, yeah, we've been living beyond our means for quite some time now, and there's been a real structural imbalance between income, spending, and now borrowings. And this is a result of years of being recommended and approving projects without the sustainable funding that we've talked about. And yes, the IPART has a big part to play with that as well. But, you know, we've talked about that growing city, and it's been mentioned many times before about gold plating. Like, we need to be realistic about projects and capital projects moving forward. And it's been mentioned as well, you know, the shockwave and who's coming. But, you know, the reality is the world is in a really interesting place at the moment. We're getting updates weekly on fuel and how the impact, what that looks like. But what that looks like for families is also really, really real. And I don't think this is a resilient position that we're in, but, you know, sometimes it does feel like we're a bit of a house of cards just waiting to fall. And I understand that these scenarios are there to kind of provide a pathway and different options as well. But I have real concerns about our restricted funds, but also our water fund borrowing from that. You know, there was real trepidation initially, and then it was about saving interest, but we're doing that for a reason, and it isn't a good position to be in. And I understand why we're doing it, but it's not enviable. You know, I probably ask myself when I'm looking at the budget today and met with Gail and the Mayor this afternoon, but, you know, where is the real discipline here? I know there's been lots of meetings and lots of cuts, and people are, you know, vying for projects in this budget as well. But we're still pursuing large capital programs, and we don't have the money for it. And we're talking about a solution, but we're not quite there yet. We need to get real, I think, and make some really difficult decisions. And I think we do need to be tougher on this budget. And I think when the community hears about the proposition, I hope they look at the budget, and I hope they give genuine feedback about an SRV, but also what they find important to them. And some of those, we're not just talking about services, we're also talking about capital projects in here as well. Like, we've got plans and reviews of plans with no money to spend on these plans or actionable items. And I think that, in my view, we really should be pausing non-essential capital projects, especially for this financial year going forward, knowing what's coming. And I hope the community looks line by line at the review, and I hope they have a really good hard look at the budget, because there'll be some serious implications if they don't speak up and have their say. I think we need to prioritise core services and asset renewal and have plans, and I think we really need to restore discipline with this budget. There's still more work to be done before an SRV is approved, and, you know, we're at, I don't know what gate we're at, gate 1 still, I think, and there was talk of 8 gates to come. But yeah, I would hate to see us go down the path of a huge special rate variation when we can absolutely still be looking at the budget and be making some really tough decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bullivan, did you have a question or a statement also?
No, a question, thank you, Mayor Max.
Thank you.
Through you to the relevant member of staff.
Yep.
If it pleases you.
Pleases me greatly.
In our working in our scenarios, have we looked at other LGAs that have implemented SRVs over the period and got a gauge of where they're at? You know, North Sydney was 100, I think Federation was 87%. So where do we stack up as far as SRVs go statewide, if you've done that homework, Mr. Hastie?
Mr. Hastie, have you done that homework?
Thank you for the question through you, Mayor Mac. I'm beginning that homework. I think from memory, 42 over 2 years. I read in the last week that it's certainly it's not the highest, that's for sure. I would need to take the question on notice, but I think the reporting from IPART is showing that there are a significant number of councils that are going down the path of special rate variations that are to the tune of 10 up to, you know, 80 or 90% over a number of years for the reasons that we've outlined in these reports. You know, the costs of everything are going up, and if we want to continue the service provision and asset renewal to a certain standard, then we need to find the income from somewhere. But I can bring that information back. In fact, it will be brought back as part of a future report regarding the special rate variation options that we would look to present. I've got no doubt that there would be a current environment of what we've seen in the last few years throughout New South Wales. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Nothing. Mr. Hastie, is there more to go?
Thank you, everyone. We're just looking at key decisions and next steps. And look, I'd like to thank the council group for this presentation and discussion. I am acutely aware of how hard this is, and I don't like any of these options, but my role requires that I share this information to our decision-making body so that we make a decision that puts us in a better position financially over the next 10 years. Looking at dates, so at our coming council meeting is when we would look to get approval. The budget that we've been discussing as part of the long-term financial plan, the 26-27 budget, will be presented officially, and we'll look for endorsement in order to place it on public exhibition for 30 days. Once that exhibition is complete, we'll be able to make the budget and then move on into the next financial year. That's our decisions and next steps, and that's the presentation. So thank you.
Thank you. Question, Councillor Glycan?
Thank you. Question through you to the most relevant member of staff. One of our a councillor just raised the question about, are there other councils and shires with special rates variations that have happened in the last few years? We know Albury City did so many years ago, but my understanding is if we could get that information for future, that would be very helpful, because we need our community to know that we're not the only community in Australia, let alone New South Wales, who is undertaking this process at the moment, or other councils who have done prior to us. And I'm also mindful of the fact that this rate cap that is applied to us is not only us, it's across New South Wales. So there must be other councils who are in a similar position for similar reasons, and that is because expenses have been greater than our income capability generation through the rate cap. And so it would be good to understand why the other councils were doing it. Was it for specific projects that they wanted to undertake, which is one of the options that you can apply for a special rates variation for? The other option is to provide, really to make up that gap that is missing for lost potential rates over the years. If we could find out that information, that would be helpful, not just the percentages, but the actual reasons as to why those councils are doing so. And I do recall that our acting CEO has made reference to other councils being in difficult financial situations at the moment, and we as a council are not the worst in New South Wales. So I just want to ask for information around that, or those sort of areas, to be able to support us in our decision making based on benchmarking and looking at other councils and shires in New South Wales. Thank you very much.
Mr. McGrath.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just on the last point, I don't think I ever used the terminology that we're not the worst. I think I said we're not alone. Look, I think annually the IPART organisation does publish the special rate variation processes. That should be able to be summarised relatively easily, and it normally sets out the rationale for the applications. So we'll endeavour to get that together as part of the process, maybe not for next week, but to come back as part of the decision making in any event. And the final thing, I'm happy to stand corrected on this, but just to make sure we're clear, my understanding, Albury City's SVR as it was, 2010 to 2014, was not, did not remain in the rate base. It was to fund some significant projects at the time. And if I'm correct, the SVR came off at the end of 2014 or 15. Not correct?
I'm not sure.
Not sure. We'll get clarification on that, but my understanding is that that particular SVR was to fund specific projects, predominantly of a capital nature. But, you know, so it wasn't built into the rate base in an ongoing fashion, but we'll get clarification of that as well. Yeah.
I think you are correct, Mr. McGrath. It was taken off from 215.
Yeah.
Just to give you some idea, there's 10 councils currently have applications before IPART for the last quarter. And they're considering their applications right now. So that varies from city to regional council. So
10
at the moment, that's 10 just in the last quarter.
just at the moment. So it'd be good to see that if we
Mm.
could have that comparison as to how many have already, and we may find that it's 90% of the councillors. And
Yeah,
thank you.
no worries. Yeah. Mr. Hasty, thank you very much for your presentation this evening. It was very thorough and very well put together, and it'll give us a lot of food for thought moving forward, and certainly appreciate the work yourself and the team have done to enable this, because we still need to run the day-to-day business of the operation. So thank you. We'll just take a short break for Councillor Bullivant to go to the toilet. Anyone else wishes to follow, they may.
Can I just say, there's
Mr. Christie, we're reconvening at 8:28. Councillor King is not here. Well, she'll be here shortly. Mr. Christie, away you go.
Thank you, councillors. And just purpose of presentation tonight is just to give you an update on the Fuguna Precinct Planning Structure Plan and the planning proposal and development control plan following the adoption of the structure plan in December council meeting. So when you adopted the structure plan in December council meeting, as we know, that did not make the actual changes to our planning controls. It did make a strategy and a policy which can guide future decisions, but obviously to give that strategy and policy, one, more teeth and weight in any decision making, but also two, more certainty for landowners into the future. The idea now is to then incorporate this into our actual suite of planning documents, which require some changes to our local environmental plan for a planning proposal, and also some changes to Part 19 of our DCP, which currently reflects the 2014 structure plan, not the 2025 structure plan. So at this stage, we're finalising a report to council in May. We've pretty much finalised the planning proposal. We're just working through some of the detail of the DCP because they should be exhibited together. If there's any slight delay in finalising some of the DCP detail, that can come to council in June while we're seeking and waiting for the government to give us permission to advertise the planning proposal. We'd like to report them together, but we might split them if needed, just so that we can continue the planning proposal, because that will take a month or two to get government permission to exhibit. So just a reminder of the structure plan and a number of changes from the structure plan, or a number of elements that were consistent with the 2013 structure plan. But at the time of adoption of the 2013 structure plan, council didn't want to enshrine those into any planning proposal or local environmental plan changes, as they wanted to see how development rolled out in Fuguna, and that was the purpose of the 2025 adopted plan. So as I said, the intent of this is to implement the recommendations of the TWPSP, and obviously to try to achieve the objectives of the TWPSP as outlined up there, which is around updating those land use zones, around encouraging that residential development, encouraging commercial development within designated zones, encouraging a variety of housing densities, and looking at provision for additional open space and supporting social infrastructure. In regards to some of the zonings around commercial centres, or what we're calling as urban centres. Yep, my apologies.
Councillor Hudson, not your problem. My apologies.
Thank you, Mayor Mac. Through you to Mr. Christie. Mr. Christie, you just mentioned that with the original iteration of the PSP, the 2013, though the planning instrument changes weren't made because council wanted to essentially see how things went. My understanding is in that original 2013 document, it was up for review in 5 years, which would have made it 2018, or possibly it was 10 years. In any case, would have happened sooner than it did. So I'm really glad to see that this is happening and that we are putting these things in, because I think that's how we get the outcome that the community now expects. I don't understand really what you're saying, I guess, in the sense that if we wanted to see how it was rolling out, why didn't we do the review when we originally said we were going to?
Yep. So in terms of, thank you for the question, and for you, Mayor Mac. So in terms of the review, there's a variety of reasons, and we've talked through this previously, lead up to the adoption of the structure plan last year. Why there was a variety of delays to that included other relevant policies such as the social infrastructure strategy. We're looking at open space requirements, community space requirements, and a variety of things. And there were a number of components that the actual review itself commenced in 2022, 2023, and just took obviously a substantial period of time to make certain that we had sufficient and fulsome community consultation all through the process, not just at the end with a review process, or substantial community consultation up front. And that included discussions that we did in 2018, 2019, which I think we called a conversation with Fuguna, but it could be Fuguna Conversations, where we started to talk to the community about what was working with the current structure plan, what they did or didn't like. So a lot of the groundwork and the bedwork did occur within that initial 5 to 10 year period. It's just a substantial meat of the actual work was occurring over 23, 24 and 25. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Christie.
So in regards to the zoning changes from a commercial context, as we call them, urban centres in the structure plan. So it's introducing urban centres with two different zoning types depending on the purpose of those urban centres. So the smaller urban centres, which those village centre zones, they're getting what's called an E1 local centre zoning. Again, this is consistent with what was in the recommendations in the TWPSP about likely future zonings. The plan proposals just fleshed out all the requirements we do to be able to address what requirements we need to address, including a number of state government policies and plans that we need to address. In regards to the major neighbourhood centres, there's existing major neighbourhood centre 1, which is the one around the existing Woolies and the Diamond Drive area. That's already currently zoned, but that was zoned E1 commercial centre. That's proposed to be up-zoned, so to speak, to the E2 commercial centre zone, which will then also be consistent with the two future major neighbourhood centres proposed to be zoned as E2 commercial centre, reflecting their higher order than the smaller village centre zones and the uses there accordingly. So, for example, from that particular end, some of the land use permissibilities are different between those zones, reflecting those higher order commercial uses. One of the things that did talk in the structure plan was it talked around some of those areas adjacent to the major neighbourhood centres, which were going to have the major neighbourhood residential around it, and there was the option for those to either be zoned MU1, mixed use zone, or R3 residential, medium density residential. So that's gone now into that and making some recommendations around where those areas might split between those two and which areas might be zoned MU1 and which areas therefore might be zoned R3. The vast majority of them are zoned R3 and proposed to be zoned R3 because that is the predominant purpose of that, is to get some increased densities around those major neighbourhood centres. But recognising there's some areas, as was outlined in the structure plan, where a mixed use zone, which allows a variety of lower order commercial uses and some uses which may not be appropriate in the commercial zone but support commercial zone, where they may be appropriate, and that's where we looked at the MU1. So the report, when you'll get it in some detail, will also visualise those differences in changes as well. Then in regards to residential zonings and some of the other general zonings, there was an area that was identified for R2 residential, low density residential over to the east. So around that Dairy Lane area and over to the eastern edge of Thurgoona-Willinga precinct. So that's implemented. That was clearly outlined in the structure plan that would be the case. Same as we outlined in the structure plan that the higher order parks, such as our sports ground and our district park, would be zoned RE1, being public recreation, rather than a lot of our lower order parks are zoned the surrounding zone, whether they're residential or whatever zone they're surrounded by. So that, again, is what was in the structure plan. So it's just implementing the recommendations of the structure plan. Same as the structure plan recommended an area, for want of a better call, calling a bit of a buffer area adjacent to the Defence Force over on the eastern side of it, where it recommended the opportunity for an E4 productivity support zone, which one provided a little bit of a residential buffer from residential uses adjacent to the defence, but also provide an opportunity for some further employment opportunities within Thurgoona, so to become more self-sufficient rather than having to always leave the suburb to go for employment opportunities. There was the area south of Bells Reserve, which was zoned R1, that was recognised that had greater environmental characteristics and therefore an environmental zone was appropriate. And what the Thurgoona-Willinga precinct structure plan said is that we'll then just look at what's the appropriate minimum lot size for that area. So it's looking at that C4 zone, and I'll get to a minimum lot size recommendation on the next slide. And then there were just some other little minor zone adjustments, a lot of them just to do with cadastral boundaries and the like, but they were the significant changes. And again, all those are consistent with what was in the endorsed structure plan. In regards to minimum lot size, so again, updating the minimum lot size maps accordance with the proposed zoning, remembering that most of this land is all currently zoned R1 general residential with a 450 square metre minimum lot size. So those areas where we're not looking at residential development, such as those areas which are zoned RE1, private recreation, they won't have a minimum lot size. Those areas where we're looking at increasing residential development opportunities and providing more dense residential development opportunities, then they will have an increase accordingly, which would be a minimum lot size that's smaller, so going below 450 square metres. And then in that R2 residential development zone, that area there is being between around 2,000 and 2,500 square metres, as indicated there. And again, you'll get far more detail in the plans that come to you in the report that comes to you in more detail. The area south of Bells Reserve that I just mentioned, again, reasonably consistent with what was in the response to the submission in the structure plan, a mixture of 2 hectares and 20 hectares, with the 20 hectares overlaying the significant remnant vegetation south of that site. And that area then we go along the Kawana Road Reserve, allowing a little bit more density opportunity and having a 2 hectare minimum lot size. Again, that was consistent with the recommendations of the structure plan.
Thank you, Mac, to Mr. Christie. So are you talking about the northern side of that Kaiwana Road? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for the question and for you, Mayor Mac. Yeah, so if we're talking about that area south of Bells Reserve, the northern portion of it, so the bit closer to Bells Reserve, and over a bit more to the western side of it is where the significant vegetation is, both not just in the type of vegetation, but the actual extent of vegetation cover. Then that's the area that's got the 20 hectare, which really gives it 1 dwelling potential. And then the other one is then for that 2 hectares, and depends on how it goes. You can't always say I've got 20 hectares, I'll get 10 blocks, because dimensions of blocks and features and a whole variety of things will determine what your outcome is. But that other area then going to the south, which is more sparsely vegetated, looking at that 2 hectare minimum.
Yeah.
It's up there on the brown bit with the 20, and then the purple bits there with the 2.
Thanks for that.
And then generally within the remainder of the area, it remains as 450 square metres minimum lot size, as is the general residential zone minimum lot size for Albury. Minimum dwelling density provisions. So this was a topic that the structure plan investigated and looked at, got our community thoughts on, and this is trying to work out, really, we can zone minimum lot sizes around these higher density areas, but that by itself means that that's the minimum you have to achieve. It's 450. Someone could come into us with 1,000 and 5,000 square metre lots and it still beats the minimum, but it's not getting the density outcomes that we're trying to achieve as a community. So that's where we said in the structure plan, we're going to explore some of those alternatives about how we say, well, this is the minimum, but an average or density provisions need to be this. So there's 2 areas that are looked at. Again, this is consistent with what's in the structure plan, which is those areas around the village centre. We're looking at around 15 dwellings per hectare. And then those areas around the major neighbourhood centres, we're looking at a minimum around 20 dwellings per hectare as provisions. Now, there's a variety of ways that they may be able to achieve that. Obviously, if they're just doing on paper subdivisions as pieces of dirt for them people to sell, then they need to look at the lot sizes as such. If they're obviously doing developments where they're incorporating the design of development that will come out as well, townhouses or whatever might be in the future, they might have more flexibility with the lot sizes because they're actually dealing with the built product, and you've got more certainty with the built product in the end. So this isn't why it's not dictating what that should be, because there's more than one way to achieve. It's just, again, dictating the outcomes. And no minimum dwelling provisions, density provisions are proposed for the R1 general zone, which is consistent again with the remainder of Albury, just those minimum ones where we're trying to encourage increased density.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the most relevant member of staff, looking at this different way of declaring that you need, this is, the capacity of that land, and trying to create a a sort of standard growth pattern. So normally it's a minimum 450 size lot, and this is an alternative way of looking at that. I have no problem with it, except our community may ask, why is that lot smaller than that lot? And we already have people who live in Thurgoona who complain about trying to increase the density at all, let alone the potential that this might create. How do we deal with that? And how do we sell that message? What are we anticipating that people won't notice this, or how's that going to work? Thank you.
Christie?
Thank you for the question, and for you, Mayor Mac, in some ways, one of the great planning conundrums, because it is a challenge to not only engage the community in strategic exercises, but to get them to understand what those outcomes will likely to be. And again, I'll use the existing structure plan as examples that exist, the previous structure plan, sorry, the 2013 plan, where it anticipated that 50 odd % of dwellings and or lot sizes were going to be 500 square metres or lower. And we got applications in for areas such as Brooklyn Fields, which had an average at that stage of 623 square metres, and that was considered significantly dense. Mitchell Park had an average of 618 square metres and were considered significantly dense, and had I guess, concerns around that is that I guess council's been clear both through the creation of the structure plan with our information that went out, the discussion paper that went out in March, April 2024, talk to the community about options and opportunities around how density could occur, and that there were various opportunities. You could have really small, large, high density areas that might be 4 and 5 and 6 buildings, stories tall as buildings, or you can have something that might be more traditional, that might cascade out a little bit. The general community feedback was, not that they necessarily loved either of them, but he kind of said one of them's got to happen. They genuinely preferred that little bit of a more gentle cascade out rather than sheer density provisions. That started to influence some of these components. I'm sure once we do actually get development applications in, this is always the case, then people will immediately see the visualisation of their impacts. But for us to achieve the outcomes and the aims and objectives of the structure plan, this is the type of thing that we need to start to have a look at. It is something new for Albury. So a lot of our stuff's also going to be around talking with our development community around how they can work through this. And one of the projects we've got going on the sideline with this is some density provision toolkit to assist our developers with understanding what levers they're pulling and how their development stacks up or doesn't stack up in regards to these density provision toolkits, because that's going to be one of our key discussions as well as for our community, so they can see how it's achieving the objectives.
All right, fantastic, because the not in my backyard people are happy always with the general scenario until it's next door to them, and so yeah, I think it could be a real issue, but yes, we have to increase that density. Absolutely understand. Thank you.
Thank you. Question, Councillor Hudson.
Thank you, Mayor Mac. Thank you, Mayor
Going to the
Mac.
hip.
To Mr. Christie. I'm just trying to, I think you answered the question already, but I'm not sure I quite got the answer. So the density provision, does that include, for a given hectare of a development, does that include the roads and the parks and that kind of thing as well? Or are we simply talking about lot sizes?
Yeah. So there will be, it's not just around lot sizes. Someone talks about the density dwelling provision, and I'd have to get it off the top of my head. There is actually a definition both in our structure plan and in the LEP, which is consistent with the statewide, where it does exclude certain areas within your density provision, such as your roads that you create. It more looks at the actual built upon area, which is your lots. But in the report, we'll actually be clear around what those density provisions are and how they're achieved. You'll see them in more than just this summary that I'm giving you tonight. There'll be a clear definition of what density means and how you calculate your area and what's excluded from those calculations.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's fantastic that we're doing something a bit different and innovative for Albury. So I really commend the staff for proposing this. I guess going to what you said about Brooklyn Field, like to me, maybe this is just a personal opinion. Yes, it's higher density than Laguna Park or perhaps older parts of Albury. That's still not dense living in my view, though. And so 15 dwellings per hectare, that works out at about 670 meters, square meters per dwelling. Those are larger lots than in Brooklyn Fields, though, is my understanding. So I guess my question is, does it actually go far enough? Because if we're talking about the density of, say, a Brooklyn Field around a major neighborhood center, when ideally we would be having row houses or multi-unit dwellings, whatever. Yeah, how do we, I guess it's a wait and see thing, but how do we know we're going to achieve those objectives?
Yep, thank you for the question, for you, Matt. And that's why I said it's not a pure case. I've got 1 hectare of land. I put 15 dwellings on it. Therefore, I've got 15 dwellings per hectare. It actually excludes portion of your lands from that calculation and how you design your development. So very well might be that your subdivision is 1 hectare, but only 5,000 square meters of it counts towards your density provisions because of the meeting the definition. That's why I said the detail would come with you. With the report where we'll clearly lay out what those are. But yeah, it's not a pure case of getting a 1 hectare piece of land and split it into 15 portions. You will get, that won't equal 15 dwellings per hectare in the density calculations.
Okay, thank you.
Again, which isn't unique to Albury City, it's a statewide standard.
Sure, thank you.
So, Mr. Christie, just to clarify your issue about reservations, roads and infrastructure included in that hectare, is it correct that, and look, Brooklyn Fields is a typical example, and luckily they're not in the room, but essentially it's starting to look a bit like Western Sydney. You've got one big wide road and then you go into the neighbourhood and the roads are barely wide enough if there wasn't an emergency for a fire truck to get access and there are cars parked on both sides of the road, they wouldn't get through. So I understand in New South Wales there's no minimum width for a road and how do we apply that in the LAP or the DCP to enforce that as a requirement? Because essentially what we're doing is creating a mini Western Sydney. Now I've looked at Wodonga and Albury's development out there and Wodonga's development, Barrendoodle. They seem to be a lot better at what they're doing, and their environmental zones and the width of their roads seem to be more commensurate with the meandering and environment, including the hills and the outlook. I don't get it. I just think are we able to enforce some regulation in relation to road widths in these estates?
Yep, and thank you for the question and for you, Mayor Mackett. Yes, we are, but the DCP is not our vehicle for that. It's our engineering guidelines, and that's a separate project being worked on, and that looks at a variety of components. But the DCP itself doesn't set the minimum lot width. The DCP references our engineering guidelines, and our engineering guidelines create a lot more detail around the style of road, the type of road, what purpose the road serves, how many dwellings it's anticipated to service. Does it connect a whole variety of bits that then set some minimum standards? Those engineering guidelines are under review at the moment through our city projects team.
But the LEP and the DCP actually set the standard for planting of trees and bushes and other landscaping, which is really missing in Brooklyn Fields and other areas. Alatello, all these other developers do miss the mark when it comes to actually greening their roadways. And if you had wider roadways and reservations down the middle, as they do in Wodonga, and had greening in those reservations, it makes it a far better amenity. I don't see us doing that, and I just wonder, are we going to actually reach that market with this new plan?
Again, thank you for the question, but I can only repeat my previous answer, which is that is outlined in the engineering guidelines.
Where the trees and planting is?
Yep, landscaping requirements, which at the moment our engineering guidelines from the top of our head are from 2009 or 2010, but I'll stand corrected if I'm incorrect in my dates. But that will include minimum planting standards, maintenance requirements, design of roads, infrastructure, whole variety of components.
So I'm going to assume
the
current engineering guidelines are letting us down, given what I see out there. Is that the assumption?
As I said, thank you for the question, for you, Mayor Mac. They're under review at the moment to see that they're up to standard to provide what we're trying to achieve.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Callahan?
Just to follow on, they've been under review for a little while. When are we likely to see the engineering guidelines come back to endorse, to view or workshop or whatever it might be?
Ms Leopold?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Callaghan, through you, Mayor Mac. We are working through the draft elements at the moment. I don't have a date in which we can expect them to return. If you do recall, we did have some trouble finding external expertise to assist us in developing the guidelines. That problem's now been overcome, but that's why it was slightly delayed, and the draft is in progress.
A follow-up?
Sorry, do we not have any internal capacity for this, or what was the obstacle that needed to be overcome? Thanks.
Ms Leopold?
The guidelines are essentially a collation of all existing standards that apply to infrastructure, engineering, best practice guidelines, those sorts of things. So we do have internal staff, a working group that works on it, and we bring representatives across all areas of council that would have some involvement in development and some interest in the engineering guidelines to make sure we have a balanced approach, but having experts that understand elements of industry best practice and like engineering standards and guidelines, for example, was an important part of developing this document.
Thank you. Continue.
Thank you. The next slide I got here talks about some changes we're looking at doing for maximum height of buildings. Again, consistent with how we've got it for our current Albury LEP 2010. Those maximum heights from the LEP perspective will just relate to those commercial areas. So again, there's some recommendations there, which are reasonably consistent with what's across the remainder of the city, which is 16 metres for E1 local centre, 20 metres for the E2 commercial centre, 16 metres for mixed use, 12 metres, which, as I said before, was around that 2 to 3 stories in height around that village centre, and then 16 metres around the neighbourhood centre, which was around that 3 to 4 stories in height as a transition element. So again, those are recommendations which are consistent with the endorsed precinct structure plan. And then the other main changes in regards to the LEP is, again, as outlined in the structure plan, updating our land reservation acquisition map, which identifies those lands that council would need to acquire at some point in time to be able to satisfy and deliver the infrastructure, whether that land is for district sports ground purposes or similar purposes. So looking at putting that into our land acquisition map, looking at the fact that there's a state government terminology called an urban release area when the areas were zoned in 2010 under the state standard instrument, and so making certain that that map accurately reflects the boundaries of the precinct structure plan, and then also looking at the productivity support zone area identified adjacent to the eastern side of the defence land, looking at making certain there's a precinct-specific DCP before that can be developed, and looking at some maximum gross floor area provisions in there so it doesn't detract from the commercial areas nearby, which is very similar to what we've done at our other E3 productive support area around Willowbank and a couple of areas around the city to make certain they serve a minor commercial purpose related to some industrial uses that don't become a de facto commercial centre.
Councillor Bullman, question?
Thank you, Mayor Max, through you to the relevant member of staff. I think it was in a December meeting we had mentioned the biodiversity certificate for our area of Albury. I haven't heard much more about that since then. Have we any updates,
There's
please?
an email on your emails,
No, I
yeah.
haven't checked them yet. So.
No.
Good.
Ms Leopold?
I can take it if you want. The bridge in regards to our biodiversity certifications, that was advertised by New South Wales Department of DQ, Climate Change. So prior to Christmas, they received, for the top of my head, it was 31 submissions, which was 23 against, 8 in favour. They considered it, and then it was around the 21st or so of February, give or take a few days, they extended our biodiversity certification for Faguna Willinga area only for 2 years.
Continue.
They're the main changes that will be outlined in the planning proposal. So Again, the planning proposal needs a resolution from council, and then once we've got an endorsed resolution from council, we go to the state government and seek a gateway determination, but we can't exhibit a planning proposal until we have that gateway determination from the state government giving us permission to exhibit. As I said, what we're also working on in concert, rather than just doing the LAP zoning changes by themselves, is we're working on the DCP to then update Part 19 of our DCP, but also so when it goes out to our community, it can understand how these things work in concert with each other. Otherwise, you get the question, oh, why is this not in the LAP? Well, it's because it's in the DCP. So it helps the community understand how those things work together for trying to achieve what we're trying to achieve with the structure plan. So again, might talk for this, but the intent of this is to implement the recommendations of the Whanganawinga Precinct Structure Plan, but also support with finer great detail what's happening with the zoning changes and the like in the LEP. I won't go into all the chapters because there's a variety of components under Part 19 that will be looked at, and there's the list of a number of those, but just to bring out a couple of the highlight ones. One of them is around open space, and so this will deal with those major open space areas that were identified, the 4 local sports grounds, the district sports ground, district park, etc. So there'll be some concept sketches around what they're likely to look like. They're working through our parks and recreation, our city landscapes area. Again, they're not going to be guarantees, but what they are is around testing those areas, do they work and what's been trying to achieve, so that if there is some need to have some flexibility to slightly fiddle with the dimensions, developers are clearly understanding what we're trying to achieve in each of those facilities, because not all of them will be the same, because they'll have different foci. One might focus around baseball and softball and the like, and others might focus around other types of facilities and sports that have different needs, and their dimensions can occur differently on site. But they will also identify minimum standards consistent with the structure plan and consistent with our social infrastructure strategy. There will also be some likely outcomes for how these urban centres can develop. Again, they're not going to be so prescribed and detailed that says this is the only way to do it, but they'll have some clear principles that talk around how they can be achieved, and therefore what are some ways to be able to achieve that, to again give some clear guidance and the like for our community around achieving these outcomes. Councillor Hudson.
Councillor Hudson.
Thank you, Mayor Mac. Through you to Mr. Christie. I've talked about the Diamond Drive development previously and how I don't believe that met the outcomes that we indicated we would like in the original 2013 PSP. I think it's more than that, though. My understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is there have been issues, for example, with parking on that road and access with the loading docks and that sort of thing, which has required council to essentially go back and spend more of our money now rather than the developer doing it in the first place to instigate particular parking areas and that kind of thing. To me, like that's an unbelievable failure of the process, because essentially we've got a much, in my view, worse outcome because we wanted a nicely walkable good pedestrian amenity development there, and we've ended up with a street which is horrific to drive down. And then we've had to go back and spend even more council money, I mean, it's ratepayer money, on essentially fixing up a road which should never have been designed that way in the first place, in my view. So I understand that we're not being incredibly prescriptive around these areas, and obviously we have to allow the developers some level of flexibility. How do we ensure that we don't have really suboptimal outcomes like we've had on Diamond Drive, where we are then having to go back in 5 years down the track and essentially remediate issues which should have never occurred in the first place?
Yep. Thanks for the question, and for you, Max. So I guess it is right. It's trying to get that balance right, but between able to provide clear guidance around outcomes we're after, but we're not actually able to design the actual centres themselves to the nth degree that it shows the design detail of every building and every walkway through a 3 and 4 hectare site, because they haven't gone to that level of detail. And it's probably because some of these areas might be developed in the next 6 to 12 months, may not be developed for 5 to 10 or 15 or 20 years, and commercial developments will change over that period of time. So I guess it's the keys around providing those objectives and those outcomes with enough clarity that they're guidance, but not so much broadness that they can just be used to apply to absolutely anything and still be saying to see if the change. But again, the final, I guess, proof in the pudding will be the decision that's made on the development application that comes to actually develop the site. So it's going to be a combination of both, with the best way to achieve it. But we're not going to be able to design it to an nth degree with precise certainty. Then you don't want it so loose with just some objectives that anything can go there and it's not going to achieve the outcomes we're after. I know it hasn't given the precise answer, but that's the balance in essence that will go into the recommendations.
Yeah, thank you. I guess it's incumbent on the council at the time to make sure that the actual DAs are going to meet those objectives as well.
That's correct. And however,
you don't have to spend money on.
That's correct. They'll either hit the objectives or not, and developments of that scale are going to be of such interest that they will garner councillor attention, either through us as staff as a report to you, like with the weekly reports around applications of interest, or obviously any other community or media reporting around it as well. The other bit to point out in the DCP, there was the council resolution, specific council resolution around the green blue networks. So just being clear around picking up that precise council resolution, which was adding that extra width around where green areas were alongside blue areas, as in the environment was adjacent to waterways. So this plan here shows how it's getting that extra distance and the like around that, consistent with the resolution of council. So again, I did talk for this one quickly earlier. Obviously, once we have a council resolution, if you're so inclined, then we go to the state government and we seek what's called a gateway determination. What we've been trying to do to fast track this process is we have a monthly catch up with our regional office for the Department of Planning, and we've been bringing them through on this process here and telling them what we're doing so that they're fully aware, so that hopefully when it comes to them, it's a smoother process to go through to get gateway determination. It still won't happen in a week or two, but hopefully it shouldn't take 6 months either to get that gateway determination to be able to get to exhibition. We've also been speaking with the Department of Planning around the fact that this planning proposal, as I said, with the structure plan, is still looking at the next 30 to 50 years of growth. This is not all happening tomorrow. So there's some areas of this, and as you knew when you adopted the structure plan, which were contentious either with landowners or with the community. So this planning proposal, we also expect will have some areas contention where issues were raised, such as where local sports grounds should be, where the district sports grounds should be, where commercial areas should be, etc. Then I'm sure will get played out and again in our community by either the landowners or by the community, because this is another opportunity for them to prosecute it as we now implement the structure plan. So we have spoken to the department around how we might not necessarily derail the whole thing, but how there might be opportunities if we start to get some areas that are contentious, we might be able to go forward with the simpler elements of the precinct structure plan through the planning proposal and the DCP, and some of the other areas more contentious might be able to be put aside and dealt with as either a separate planning proposal or as a phase 2, so that we can make certain that we start to implement some of these, especially the more adopted and more accepted areas of the structure plan, where the landowners are in full agreement and the community's in full agreement up front. But we also don't want to do 72 different planning proposals rezoning different parcels of land either. So that's what we're dealing through with the planning proposal. And that gateway determination, we have our community participation plan, which will set minimum standards. The gateway determination will also set those minimum standards, and we'll make certain we exceed whatever those minimum standards might be. Theirs might be more than ours might be more than theirs. So again, as I said, the proposal is to exhibit the planning proposal and the draft DCP together. The plan at this stage is also report both of those to you in May, but as we're still going through some of the finer detail of the DCP, it might be slightly deferred, but that won't cost us any time because you can consider that for exhibition while we're getting the planning proposal gateway determination from the Department of Planning. But the plan is to try to get them both to you together. As I said there, that's our minimum standards. as per our community participation plan. And obviously from that end, we can go well and above those minimum standards. So with the structure plan, for instance, I think we went for 56 days from recollection for the structure plan. But obviously the longer we exhibit, then it means it does put a delay further down the track for the process. That's just giving you some standards if what we think might work from our particular end. If in a best case scenario, we hope that there's a chance that at the very least the simple aspects of the planning proposal might be wound up towards the end of this year. But if we take it from the state government, if they take their minimum standards, their benchmarks, it also could go to the middle of 2027 as well and still hit those standards. 300 working days is around approximately 60 weeks, give or take a few public holidays in between. So probably about 62, 64 weeks. So a bit over a year.
Councillor Cohen.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you to your team. But I think more broadly too, thank you to this kind of bleeds across many different groups and teams within council. So I know it's not over yet, but it's a critical mountain of work. And I've been at a few of the consultations, and although it mightn't have pleased everyone, I think the consultation with landowners in the community has been absolutely outstanding. And I know from a council perspective, we've been taken on the journey the whole way. And I really feel that we've learned a lot, we've been listened to, and I think there's a lot of feedback I can see there tonight. So yeah, thank you. It's pretty amazing. A little way to go, but yeah, great work. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Christie, that's you done, I think. Uh-oh.
This one here.
Oh,
Sorry.
we weren't doing that tonight.
Yeah, I don't think so.
No, we weren't. Okay. Righto, officers' reports for consideration. IPE 10.1, Oddys Creek Splash Park. We have to move back into normal council. Thank you, Councillor Glacken.
Yes, I'd like to move that we go back into normal, the committee meeting from the committee of the whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bullivan.
Happy to second it, Mayor Mac.
Happy to move. All those in favour? Anyone against? Motion's council is whatever, carried. IPE 10.1, Oddys Creek Park Splash Park detailed design and project update. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Bullivan.
I recommend that the council committee recommends to the council that Council A receives and notes the contents of the report. B, agrees to seek approval from government funding partners to defer commencement of the splash park for up to 12-month period, noting current procurement uncertainties and the volatility around pricing and material supply due to the world fuel uncertainties. C, endorses a $5 million allocation as the preferred option to construct Oddys Creek Splash Park project to be included across the 2026, 2027 and the 2027 and 2028 capital program budgets. D, includes an additional $100,000 in the operational budget towards the maintenance of the splash park following construction, likely to be from 2027-28 onwards. And E, continues to undertake further investigations, including solar panels with battery storage and alternative water sources, which will offset ongoing operational costs of the Oddys Creek Splash Park.
Happy to second that recommendation to the council. Thank you.
No, I just reserve the right at the moment. Thank you, Mayor Mac.
Thank you. Councillor King, you have a question?
Thank you. Through you to the most relevant member of staff. What are the risks of deferring for 12 months with our funding partners? I am just conscious that often Treasury looks to claw back surplus money that hasn't been spent within a time frame. Is there any hints on the possibility of that deferral and what those risks might be?
Mr. Costello.
Thanks very much for the question, Councillor King, and through you, Mayor Mack. Look, we've had some preliminary and informal conversations with our government partners in that regard. It's fair to say they're very understanding of the need for deferral, given the current circumstances that we're seeing unfolding day by day and week by week at the moment. And they're also cognizant of the fact that there was you may recall, it was very late to execute the actual funding deed. It only was executed, I think, the regional deal, the initial conversations and negotiations happened over a couple of years. The deed itself didn't get executed until March last year. And so at that time of signing, we all indicated that point in time it was going to be very difficult for us to go through a process of community engagement, detailed design and construction within the timeframes that they'd already set out. They were already very ambitious. This has complicated further. That being said, there's always a risk, but the conversations to date have been relatively understanding. They are looking to understand in the next week or two so that they can look to move monies across financial years is our understanding. So they are looking for advice from us as soon as possible in terms of what that looks like from our perspective.
Thanks.
Thank you. Speaker 4, another question, Councillor Hudson.
Thanks, Mayor Mack. Through you to the most relevant member of staff. Similar to Councillor King's question, it sounds like we've largely answered the question whether it will happen or not, from Mr. Costello's answer, but a $5 million project deferred by 1 year is not going to be a $5 million project in 12 months' time. So I'm a little bit worried. Or what analysis or assumptions have we made to assume that it won't be more expensive to do it if we defer it by 12 months? Even more expensive.
Mr. Costello.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Councillor Hudson, and through you, Mayor Mack. Look, the team have looked at a whole lot of escalation options through that, but we've also gone through a whole range of value management options as well, and that's, you would have seen through the report, we've identified a range of stages. So you're correct, there is a risk that a $5 million project may not be a $5 million project in 12 months' time, but I think that goes to the heart of the report in having a range of different options at councillors' hands, so that if and when we do go to market, council can make an informed decision about what pricing comes back for the different stages and options that have been identified. So the plan basically is to create, the procurement documentation that allows us to not test the market, but certainly to build the entirety of the splash park. But we would stage that documentation in a way that allows us to make some decisions at the awarding of tender time, subject to the financial situation of council at that point in time.
Thank you.
Question, Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Mayor Mack. It's a question, but it's also a little bit of a statement as well. We were addressed by Charlie Mitchell about a month ago in this chamber and talking about the dangers of going ahead with grants that are less than 65–70% of the project cost, and noting that this is a seasonal facility that's got recurrent ongoing funding and staffing. How are we looking financially for such a project in the current climate?
Mr. Costello.
Yeah, thanks very much.
And probably two more things, if I can, with the same question. And this is sort of a nice to have facility rather than something that we need.
Sounds like an IEC. Mr. Costello.
Thanks very much for the question, Councillor Baker, and through you, Mayor Mack. Look, we totally appreciate and understand the situation we're in at the moment. One of the options in the report is to hand back the funding amount and to cease the project. It's a $2.5 million grant from the government, so it represents a 50% investment. So we believe it is a substantial grant amount to get the project off the ground. The Australian government did a whole business case around the splash park before they awarded us the money, so there was a fair bit of due diligence went into the planning of that and understanding the need for a splash park before they agreed to support that notion. That being said, we've tried to make elements of the splash park so that it's not just, yes, it is seasonal, a large portion of it. There's a stage in there in all seasons play, which wouldn't require the running of pumps and could be used by children throughout the course of the year. To the ongoing operations, we've done some real analysis around what those costs are, estimating those to be around the $100,000 mark, with options to scale that back if we were to look at options of solar power or alternative water sources and those sorts of things as well. So we have really tried to understand the ongoing and whole of life costs. But to your point, absolutely, it is a nice to have project, but we have heard from our community on a number of occasions over a number of years about their desires for a splash park. And so we have been internally torn with that, you know, the very much love for this project from the community, but also acknowledging our financial constraints. And so, you know, I suppose that's probably all I could probably say in regards to that.
Councillor Callaghan, question?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Mac, through most relevant staff member. Can I just have some clarification around the fluctuating number that's been from budget to budget? And I know even in our reports, a project in, you know, multiple different options and different costings. What's the conversations been in regards to the deeds and the flexibility around, you know, the original contribution being 2.5 and what that looks like now? Because it seems to be fairly fluid, or there's been conversation in that space.
Mr. Costello.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question, Councillor Callaghan, and through you, Mayor Mac. So the original intent when the initial discussions, the original funding deed was always set up on a one-to-one cost share arrangement, and that was reflected in the 4-year delivery program, the operational plan that was published in 24-25 that had a $5 million budget. That was subsequently adjusted last year, I think, in recognition of that the splash park wasn't going to commence construction this year, so the numbers were adjusted just in terms of balancing the book, so to speak. So, but the intent has always been to deliver, you know, a one-to-one cost share arrangement, you know, with our funding partners, and that was reflected in the original project plan and the deed that was shared. That being said, in terms of the capacity to wind that back or reduce that, we could have that conversation with them. That being said, they need to be confident that we're still delivering a splash park of value that they did their original business case proposition based on. So, you know, if we were just to put a sprinkler down at Noriel, that doesn't suit I imagine that doesn't suit the need of having a splash park or meet their original intent. So we can continue to have those conversations, but yeah, I'm just commenting that the original intent was always to have a one-to-one cost share with $2.5 million each investment from both the Australian government and through us as well.
Thank you. And just to follow up, if I may, I think it's a wise decision to defer at this point in time. So I appreciate that option being up there, given our financial conversations that we've had, but also the climate that we're currently in. Thank you.
Was that speaking for? No.
I tried to press 4, but I was already on, so.
Yeah, speak for.
As I said, thank you.
Speaking for, Councillor Glayton.
Thank you. Yes, councillors, I speak for deferring this matter, even though it's one-for-one funding, and I have always been very positive about funding received from the government. And this is a project that they selected from a number of projects that they wanted us to progress, and gave us 50% of that funding. And so whilst I would ordinarily be saying, no, let's get on with it, I do agree that deferring this in this current climate is a good idea, not based on only our budget, but for the specific issues faced across the world at the moment. We as a council cannot stop growing and developing. We cannot not have projects. We cannot not continue to develop our city. And yes, there have been a number of people over a number of years requesting splash parks. And no doubt those people with those children at the time will now be older children, and they will have missed this opportunity. But this is a generational project, and there will be other children in the future. There will be other families who will be requesting this into the future. I'm also conscious that there has always been, or not always, there has been discussion of a second splash park being incorporated into the Lavington Swim Centre, and part of the Lavington Swim Centre design requirements are specified by the agreement of council. That was the motion that was passed at council, was to include a splash park. My thinking is we as a council should be reconsidering, is this the best location for the splash park, or would it be better located at a swim centre? This will allow us the opportunity to consider that, to have a reality check about where we're going. I'm not saying this is not the right location. I'm not saying we should forego this funding. I'm not saying we should not undertake this project, but it allows us the opportunity to second guess, ask again, is this the right location for this splash park? Because I do not think we should be providing a second splash park, noting that we've been given funding for one. I'm not certain we would get funding for a second. It is not critical infrastructure, has been raised already this evening. It would be nice to have for our community, and it's part of being a large regional centre. It's part of being a community that one of our staff members earlier tonight was referring to, the city that people wanted to go and live in. And it's all been about that 2050 plan and developing and growing our city and the infrastructure that our community would have access to. However, tonight we're looking at whether or not we would be deferring this project. The other options are to proceed with it now. And also there would be the option to say, thanks very much to the government, we'll hand the money back. I wonder, in our discussions with the government, and no doubt because we've been told tonight that discussions have already been had, I'm wondering if it might be possible to ask the government, noting the original agreement for one-to-one funding basis, is there any scope for both organisations in the current climate to be able to increase that component each? There probably isn't. However, I think it's worth asking. They acknowledge why we're asking for the deferral, and it's based on the current climate and the increase in costs. Might they be willing to consider accepting that the increase, deferring this will have an added cost to the build, perhaps? Thank you.
Thank you. No further speakers for or against. Councillor Baldwin, did you wish to close debate?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Mac. Given the amount of conversations we've had around the table tonight and in the chamber, I think it's a very prudent move that we go to defer this project. We've got a lot of things going on in the city, and with our funding partners, we can see what they're at. But I think deferring it gives us a bit of clear air for 12 months to see where we're at with our budgets going forward. And we've got a little bit of hurt coming along in the next 12 months, so I think. So it's a prudent decision, and I think we should look at it and vote favourably for it. So I commend it to our councillors.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. IPE 10.2 Draft Heritage Strategy Review, Public Exhibition Submissions. Councillors, Councillor Hudson.
Thank you, Mayor Mac. I move that we defer this item and it return to the committee as a workshop.
Okay. Yep. So defer the item and the item returned to the IPNE for a further workshop on the report.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. In May, yeah. As soon as practical, I
As
suppose.
soon as practical.
Is that satisfactory for you, Councillor Hudson?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Seconder, thanks. Councillor Baker?
Second the motion, Mayor Mac.
Thank you. Councillor Hudson, do you wish to speak to it?
Just briefly, Mayor Mac, certainly I know we have had a workshop on this previously in the previous paradigm before we moved to the committee structure. However, based on the speakers this evening, I had some real concerns, and I just was hoping that we could have a workshop so that we could better understand how the process sort of was undertaken and council's part in it, because it seems like some of the items being recommended, I'm not convinced that this is not an argument against heritage listing in general. It's simply to say that certainly I think the concerns raised by a number of the presenters this evening at the public forum were seemed fairly serious, and I just think it warrants further discussion before we make a decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Question, Councillor Gluckin?
Yes, thank you. Through you to the most relevant member of staff, or doesn't have to be a question really. It's more, is it possible when we get the feed, when we had the presentation, we could be given feedback on the series of emails we've had from one of our speakers tonight about the heritage listing of the post office with reference to historical and social significance of the relationship with the IVA. So not the IVA physically, but the IVA, so the historical and social significance of the IVA and the post office in its own right, not just the physical building of the post office. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Callaghan, question?
Yes, thank you. And look, I may have missed it, but I tried to read as much as possible. But also got a question when we have our presentation in regards to, and happy to take this on notice, what was the threshold for consideration? Was it one person nominated and then it became part of the committee? I don't know. I raised this last time when we were in our briefings. I'm really sincerely concerned about some of the items that made it on and have stayed on. And I suppose I raised it last time, but the public housing in Chris Street, there was quite a substantial objection from Homes New South Wales in regards to that. And we've heard again tonight some really alarming pictures we've seen, and can't even think of the name, sorry, spoke to it really well. So I look forward to hearing that, but I'm curious about the process and how things stayed on and is it delisted because there was 45 people that objected it? Yeah, so future, I'm happy to take it on notice.
Mr. Christie.
Yep, thanks for the question for you, Mayor Mac, and I'll try to be brief. But in essence, it was outlined a bit in the July 2025 report where we went to our community in 2022 and asked for recommendations for listing and delisting, asked them for heritage item recommendations. Overall, there were 21 community heritage nominations received at that period of time. 8 of them didn't actually require any assessment because they were already listed. And then we went through those 13 nominations. 6 of those were carried forward as recommended nominations. But in essence, that's just the numbers. But the Community Heritage Working Group, which Council was put together as a result of a resolution of Council, considered not only the community nominations, but also considered recommendations from a review of our heritage studies and our heritage, the themes that were considered and considered around representation and what areas and ideas may have had suitable representation and where there might have been gaps. And that came up with an overall list of possible recommendations, which was then what popped out to the community. Obviously, we can talk in more detail in a few weeks' time, but that is a précis of the process.
Thank you.
Okay. Did you wish to close debate, Councillor Hudson? No further debate or questions?
No, thank you, Mayor Mac.
Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. There are no officers' reports for noting. There is any notice of urgent business, councillors? No? Okay, I need someone to move us into confidential. Thank you, Councillor Gluckin.
Thank you. Through you to the councillors, I'd like to recommend that we, the committee, move into confidential to discuss item IPE 13.1, as this is a confidential item exclusive to the press and public on the grounds that the matter relates to advice concerning litigation or advice that would otherwise be privileged from production in legal proceedings on the grounds of legal professional privilege. And it's with reference to Local Government Act 1993, 30, Section 10A 2G. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any submissions from the public regarding reasons as identified for the confidential item IPE 13.1? No. No submission been received. Have a seconder, please. Councillor Baker.
Yeah, happy to second, Mayor Mac.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, council. We'll just wait for the council to be cleared. The motion to move into confidential has now been carried for our live stream viewers. We'll now say goodbye. You can find out the outcome of this confidential session in the meeting minutes, which are published on the Albury